Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. I'll tell you, I miss you guys when I don't do a show in this much time. It's weird how much I miss, as much as you're not here with me in this room, I miss this dynamic more than you know. Especially, it's not just because of needing to address the information that is a huge part of it for me, which is why we had a 6-hour show in the last one we did. We have had a couple of interviews in between, but just with a lot going on, haven't gotten back to the show yet over the week. So glad to be here again. Lot to talk about. Of course, I'm going to follow up in regard to Georgia. There's a couple updates that I wanted to give you on Conyers, Georgia, and what's going on around the dioxin discussion that's still getting very, very little attention. We're going to talk about an interesting point opening in regard to something I've talked about in the past, but around kind of an older fact check around TLAV that I thought was just interesting to start with, that you guys will find entertaining. We're going to talk about as I said, Georgia, and then getting into some overlap therein around kind of the two-party illusion discussion is kind of just how I've been framing that. Whether it kind of revolves, that topic usually revolves around the election, sort of the two-party illusion dynamic around Trump and Kamala and like the Elon Musk Twitter overlap and how that is all working. I want to cover some important points I think are relevant just to this kind of growing concern I have for how people are falling for a lot of this stuff. And a focus on Twitter in that context, but that actually some really interesting points I think you guys are going to find fascinating. But then we're going to talk about ISIS-K. And we've talked about this before, sort of as they would frame it anyway, the Afghanistan version of ISIS. And we've gone over this extensively in the past in regard to an attack on Russia and how this is just undeniably, in my opinion, based on all the evidence we can see, let's be clear. I've said this many times, and this should not be a contentious statement with how much evidence we can demonstrate or highlight, just like it's not contentious to highlight that Zionism is exactly what it appears to be today. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these are proxy elements, I would argue, sort of like a Hamas overlap, who knows the control level today, or whether that's been completely lost over the years, and it's just become exactly what they wanted to be seen in the beginning. I don't know, but I do know that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are proxy elements that were created by the United States and Israel. There's so much evidence, it pains me that I even have to give this disclaimer when we make these kind of statements. Now, the Hamas is very different. And I actually got into something online about this the other day. My point has been very clear around this. The evidence is undeniable that Israel was giving money to at least some elements of this from the very early stages and all the way up until October 7th in regard to, as he has stated publicly, to divide them and stop the two-state solution. Now, of course, that all could be a ploy. I've never argued otherwise, that the evidence is there, just demonstrating what it shows. The important point that I always make is that Hamas itself, since 2006, let's say, a lot has changed. And I've always left open that caveat that we don't know what has happened. That's the point I'm making over here about ISIS and whatever else, more in a negative way, I would say, that they lost control and don't care what happens or use it when they can. But Hamas, as we can see in regard to the resistance and how Palestine's embracing this idea, things have changed. And I think it's clear we can see that there's different elements of the population that have grown up and changed, radicalized by Israel's actions, and that group itself has changed. But I'm still quite convinced that there are elements that are at least influenceable or able to be influenced by Israel. And so that's why I say I don't support something like that, because I don't know for sure whether it is what some people may say on either side of the conversation. I think that's a pretty objective stance on what we can see. So back to the point about ISIS-K and the reasons being brought up again today. Of course, pre-election threats every single time. Iran's threatening this and Russia's threatening that, and ISIS is going to attack the U.S. because elections, and sort of, don't think too hard into it. They just hate your freedom. It's really clumsy. Now, that's not even to say that it's fake. For all we know, it's a real threat. But let's be clear about where that threat is coming from. It's not what they would want you to think. And we're going to go over what that is in the background and showing you how this is, I think, the current embodiment. That's why I started with that explanation of what this proxy element is and how it's being used by the U.S. and Israel. Now, we're going to go over that in regards to and how it kind of dovetails with the conversation of Iran. We're going to talk about Israel and what's going on with northern Gaza, and a point about Lebanon before that, actually, and then just kind of finish with what's going on in the greater conversation around that. And the same frustrating conversation that we've continued to see for over a year now. That I think more and more people are coming to that kind of exacerbation moment where you're just, I can't believe this is still happening. I cannot believe that this is still at this point with what everybody can see. And it's really not even a hyperbolic point anymore. It is literally the vast majority of the world that is very aware of what's happening. And yet the power structures that are the spotlight could not be more on the people that were 30 seconds ago screaming rules-based order, human rights and freedom. And the spotlight is right on them as the worst villains of today. And that's not, it's important to recognize how much the world sees that. And of course, the vast majority of the world could be wrong. But I think the evidence is obviously showing you what these people are. And that doesn't have to mean every single element of these larger groups. That's the point you made about different elements within the United States, politically and otherwise. But it's important to see the real big picture and who's really involved. So we'll leave it there to start. I'm going to open with a couple of points I want you guys to see. I recently put up this page on the TLAV website, and I've mentioned this a couple times already, and I'll be showing it more as we get closer. Liberty on the Rocks 2024. This is the actual TLAV page. This will be the behind the scenes page. So if you want to actually join this event, you can buy the ticket here, and you can actually get the link here to go watch the main event, which will be streaming live on the 2nd. But that won't be streaming live on this page. I'm doing a secondary behind the scenes event kind of juxtaposed next to the larger event, so simultaneous. And so what this will be is you can buy, if you want to join and come in person, it'll be in Sedona. You can buy a ticket through here with Ryan5 as the promo code for a 5% discount, and come join us there and be a part of it. Or you can buy an online version of that ticket, same thing, same code, and watch it on the main page. The link will be here. Now, this page itself, on this in bed right here, will be where I will be hosting a behind the scenes all day event alongside that, which will be a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to be me interviewing people sort of before they go up and talk about what they're going to be speaking about, and kind of like a behind the scenes thing. I'll be wandering around and talking to people in the crowd, and it'll be a fun thing. And it'll also be me doing what I do, right? So there'll be a whole day of stuff to get into. So it's not all going to be filled with interviewing people before the event and event adjacent content. Sometimes going to be something that'll jump into my mind, and I'll talk about something for however long, or I'll play clips of previous interviews. And on top of that, please feel free to donate to TLAV. We can look at it as sort of a running TLAV donation day as well, right? So either way, it's about trying to raise money for everybody involved with this, and really kind of promote the idea of voluntarism. And by the way, interesting, I didn't even notice this, that there's oftentimes voluntarism gets accidentally used instead of voluntarism. One means essentially, like, it's weird, apparently, just like the ism is like volunteering for things. And that's sort of like the mindset. Whereas voluntarism is about the idea of voluntary exchange between people, and the larger conversation if we've gotten into, like anarchism, agorism, the idea of that, like, the larger ideology that we tend to lean into without sort of, at least might say personally, without labeling it, because I find that at least personally, my mindset tends to go around to a lot of different ideas. Takes the better parts of different things, which, by the way, I think that's what we should all be doing instead of picking a label and boxing ourselves in. Anyway, make sure you check it out. It'll be a great time. A lot of great people speaking there. As you know, here's the page. Derek Bros, Etienne or Howard himself, James Corbett, Larkin Rose. It'll be a good event. So looking forward to seeing you guys there. And I had a really great interview with Vanessa Beeley on the 18th. As I titled it, The Gaza Technocracy Incubator, which is coming from what she was discussing, and the Global Resistance Last Stand. She made a really powerful statement in this. Something that as I even say in the interview, something that I'm well aware of. But nonetheless, the way that she framed it, it gave me this ominous feeling. The idea that essentially, she's in Syria right now, and she, as you know, she's one of the last surviving real investigative journalists that is on the ground, immersing herself in this and speaking to people on all sides of conversations. And she's the people on the resistance side of this, and from Syria, but as well as we're talking about Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen. In their mindset, as she understands it, and speaking to them herself, see this as they're not fighting for their own. They are fighting for their own self-determination, their own freedom. But they see it as they're fighting for everyone's. And I kind of agree with where they're coming from with this. And she highlights both points together, that what they're using Gaza for right now is sort of, they have been for as far back as I can look, testing purposes, as they'll sell weapons as battle tested that they use on innocent Gazan people. It's not a secret. And so here she's talking about as they watch them use different technology, different gas weapons that we can't identify, but specifically the technocracy side of it with Lavender, Habsora, these AI programs that are being used to mass assassinate people. And they're literally training these things for you in a mass scale. And this is not hyperbole, guys, or hyperbolic or an assumption. This is what we're literally watching this stuff roll out. And of course, you could play the old game and pretend like, oh, but they won't use it that way on us, except that's never how history has gone. Somebody eventually will always use it the way you don't think it will be used, and they're training it right now. And so in their minds, they see this stuff. It's being used on them, and they see this as a war against that, the technocracy in general, for the global idea. Now, you could disagree with that, but I think that's pretty spot on with where we are. And obviously, first and foremost, they're fighting for their own self-determination. So make sure you check this out. Vanessa Beeley, it's been a while since we connected, and she's fantastic. One of my favorite people. So make sure you watch this, listen to it, make some clips, important stuff. Also had the one I kind of pulled off for a while because it was sort of more of a broad evergreen conversation just about the illusion of authority. And I really was hoping it wouldn't get buried by the larger conversation because Lebanon was kind of really kicking off when we first had this. But I played this on the 16th. Larkin Rose, the illusion of authority and the collapse of the two-party paradigm. Really, really good interview. Larkin is a good man, and he really does have an interesting perspective on, that it's a very difficult conversation for a lot of people to wrap their minds around. And if you want to understand where a lot of my mindset comes from when I'm talking about the idea that I think government is the problem, all these things that seem to sort of challenge what most people feel, it's coming from something like this. His book in particular, The Most Dangerous Superstition, which for whatever reason, by the way, I don't know if you guys watched the live stream. I've had the book forever. It's it's a really important thing. And I've basically, for whatever reason, while I was live with them, I kept forgetting the title of the book. Who knows how the mind works. But the point was, it's just a fascinating conversation about a core idea that it's not just it's left or it's like it goes to the core of everything. It goes before left and right and all of it. It's the idea of whether authority itself, whether we should believe that anybody has the right to rule over your life. You can call it representation if you want. They're still the ones deciding what you can do, what you can say. And that's not what we're told, but that is the way it's working today. And we all know that. Important. And I'm looking forward to speaking with him again in Sedona. So I want to start with this. I just thought this was kind of funny. This is not new, but I was going through some old stuff and I found this and I just wanted to point this out. It's interesting how much has changed actually since this was being discussed. And I think some of these things are funny. Where was the date on this? I can't see it now all of a sudden, but this wasn't, that's the date of the website. So it's old. I think it was a year or two. I think it was around the COVID-19 era timeframe. But so this is under media bias fact check, and it says The Last American Vagabond, Bias and Credibility. Of course, they have me all the way on not just the right, but the extreme right. Think about how stupid that is. Do you realize more than anybody today, the right hates me? Not conservatives and liberals, but the right versus, the team sport politics. During COVID, it was the other way around, of course. But see, that's my point about how I feel I'm being objective and my opinions are based on the facts. And then the two-party paradigm kind of oscillates around me in this wild mania of assumption and hyperbolic statements. And sometimes the one versus the other seems to be more like, oh, I like what he's saying today. And then tomorrow, oh no, now he's a right-wing maniac. Now he's a left-wing snowflake. Meanwhile, I'm staying objective and going by the facts, we all should be doing. But it's funny that that's how that works. Extreme right. I just think it's hilarious. But he goes, a questionable source exhibits one or more of the following: extreme bias, consistent promotion of propaganda conspiracies, poor or no sourcing to credible information. Think about that. Now, of course, the way they would play that is credible information. But of course, if you really pushed it to the people and you asked them the sources I would using, of course, they would say, oh, Nature? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, British Medical Journal? Well, that's fantastic. Oh, but when Ryan points to it, no, that's fake news. You mean that medical blog? That's how this is working. Or I can point to any number of peer-reviewed scientific literature or peer-reviewed science about dioxins and the risks. You get the point. I think it's just really sad that this is where it's gotten to, where there are people that truly think this is some kind of pinnacle of objective information, like having these fact checkers tell you what to think when it's embarrassingly wrong. Now, there are people out there that are ridiculous. And sometimes, the point being that they can lump them in with, I think the point is to make people that are being objective and doing the work, but are saying things that are unpopular, look like those crazy ones. And I'm not going to, the one that I tend to point to because they're ridiculous. I mean, almost always stretching the truth or blatantly lying. And I think that's by design. And I think they're trying to emulate what a lot of objective people are doing. But it says, right, of course, fact reporting low. According to its About Us page, where was it? I was looking for one more thing. It says founded by Ryan Cristian, and it says funding and ownership details are not explicitly stated. You see what I'm saying? You mean despite the fact that I explicitly almost constantly point out that we're user-funded, or not user-funded, but viewer-funded, and the idea is that it's donations, and that's it. We don't have ads. We don't have investors. You mean despite saying that repeatedly, it's all dishonest. Obviously, it's explicitly stated that's the case. They just don't like that because they want it to be open as if there's some kind of dark, seedy background that we don't know for sure. Because this is an effort to make us look bad. But it's actually working in our benefit because I frankly think this stuff is sad for most people. Now, I'll leave the point. Oh, and then that's actually where it brought me to, is I'm going to show you this last part next. It says it's reporting aligns with conspiracy theories and questions established scientific and geopolitical narratives. You're goddamn right, I do. And it says the video, gain of function's newest brain virus and genetically engineered proteins to control everything. Yeah, you realize those are two peer-reviewed scientific studies from Nature. So I'd love for them, the person who wrote this, to explain to me why, just because the title sounds like a crazy story to them, using peer-reviewed science to prove facts suddenly becomes crazy when you don't like what it shows. And that's what happened during the COVID-19 conversation. Whitney and I got bumped off Patreon for proving myocarditis was a thing. That's how this works. Then it goes on to say why the US and UK attack Houthis was an act of war against the Yemeni state. Yeah, duh. They attacked a sovereign country, but, narratives. The last one, though, was about this. And they point to this fact check that we had. Did Trump sign 5G bill? But exposure effects are misleading. Or Trump did. Sorry, I read it wrong. The point was they're trying to act like this was a fact check. And the article, actually, this is what I want to show you, the actual website that I've made this point many times. Here it was back before it actually went over 1 million. 700,000 views on this video. And all it says, 5G bill signed into law while everyone's distracted by coronavirus. Remember how many times I've mentioned this? And this is what's hilarious to me. That's exactly what happened. Donald Trump quietly signed in a bill while COVID-19 was happening. And they just lost their minds because they see COVID-19 and 5G in the same title. Now, I've had many conversations about the overlap of the symptoms and so on. Nothing definitive because I don't think that was ever necessarily proven. Yeah, the conspiracy theory way of being objective and following the facts. But what's hilarious to me is that they try to make a point about how the effects are misleading. The idea that 5G has clear, proven, peer-reviewed science that shows the side effects, which is all I was pointing to, but it shows you the video in here, which I thought was fantastic. So I wanted to reference this again. If you want to watch this, make sure it's right here. 5G bill signed into law while everyone's distracted by coronavirus. Now that I wanted to bring up because people out there are believing in Donald Trump and the rest of them while this stuff has always been happening. Donald Trump signed this bill while coronavirus, which by the way, he was spearheading the Operation Warp Speed, 5G bill was signed into, and right now, the most people pushing back on this idea would be conservatives. Where are they? How do we miss this stuff? I guess he was misled, right? Oh, he got tricked by the other guy or whatever the narrative will be to make you forget about it. Like every other thing we point to. But that's why, by the way, my main channel got deleted. When this went over 1 million views, they bumped us off YouTube. That's how that works. Hope you're paying attention. So before we come back to the Donald Trump point, I just want to start with that because I found it interesting. Let's talk about Georgia for a minute. And another large story that gets very little coverage because I honestly think because right now, this story does not have a partisan draw. And it may, for whatever reason, they may, Nick Sorter may decide to start selling Starlink over here, and all of a sudden it's a big story. The point is it shouldn't need those morons jump in the story to make this important. This is a gigantic story. And it's amazing to me that I guess the larger population gets guided along by so many of these influencers, as opposed to just seeking out the information that's important. And in this case, right now it's up in the air based on his upcoming results. When Scott has the results, I just texted him today, actually. I'm going to try to get him on as fast as possible to discuss what he is finding. But as of right now, it seems to be increasingly demonstrated as worse than East Palestine. He found the amount of compounds themselves were 12 to 20 million pounds of chlorine compounds compared to 2 million in East Palestine. To me, there's no way this couldn't be worse based on what we can see. I'm hoping I'm wrong. But here's what he wrote on no way that it could be not worse. I think I said that wrong. In any case, the point is October 20th, he posted this, and I'm going to show you this video as well. He said the video is from Friday, the 18th, from the business property of Larry Cox across the street from Ground Zero at the BioLab. Remember, it's a BioLab company, not necessarily a biological laboratory, at least as we understand it. The video was taken from, and he tested Larry Cox's property, including the soil, residues, and so on around the area and his vehicles, less than 24 hours after the shelter in place was lifted, and the cleanup was declared done. Now, what's interesting is he's going to show you the video where you can still see smoke coming off the ground. And this is as of the 18th. And he says, so why was BioLab and their crisis contractor, PR and response firm, which appears to be the response group based on the strap around neck and lanyard with the response group printed on the lanyard, and legally trying to block Larry Cox and any other business owner from accessing their property after the shelter in place was lifted and the cleanup was declared done? So that's important. So they're claiming they were done. So yet when he tries to go test on the person's property he has permission from, they won't let it happen. I mean, it's not hard to connect these dots, guys. I mean, I'm not going to say that means we can prove there's a cover-up going on, but what else does this start to look like? Especially when not a single person in this conversation other than Scott and a few around this conversation like myself have mentioned the word dioxin. Guys, you have to realize there's not a question. It's not if, it's how much, without question. How many dioxins, how much, what the level of dioxin was that was released. That's the question. Nobody has mentioned this. And just like with East Palestine, it took a week for anybody to even mention that word. And it was because of pressure from the independent media that lit a fire under the butts of the corporate media who started poking questions in these press conferences, and they were forced to acknowledge it. And now we know, oh yeah, it went 16 states across. That's the new information as of the recent thing we saw. Yeah, East Palestine went about 16 states. We knew that. I said that when it first started. This was a lot further than they wanted you to know. They covered it up. No one got in trouble, and here we are again. So he says, is there a multi-billion-dollar corporate undue influence going on here over the EPA? I think that's an obvious yes. It says the Rockdale County Fire Department and others, just like Norfolk Southern and East Palestine. Because that's the case. In East Palestine, they were, like I told you, don't forget that most important part. And I'll include that since I bring it up. That Norfolk Southern misled, or rather by omission, lied to the fire department. In an investigation, they found the controlled burn was unnecessary. And the reason, as I've said 100 times, that never seems to get out past the show, is that it was treated vinyl chloride. Treated. I'm willing to bet you nobody you talk to knows that, which still blows my mind. How is that possible? Because his people told him it was treated, which means, and they said it was most likely not going to explode. The only reason they justified the vent and not controlled burn, and he withheld that information from the fire department, who then later admitted that on the record. And nothing happened. In fact, I think Norfolk Southern gained from this entire process. Either way, this is what happens when we don't deal with the problem and let the partisan narratives fly out of control, which I'm not saying ignore anything, but just recognize how often that happens. So in East Palestine, they influenced the fire department. They influenced everybody around the conversation and essentially allowed the corporation to dictate what happened. Because this is just, if we were to talk about like Israel influence or occupation of different things, the same conversation with corporations. Many cases, these corporations run the show, and that's not how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to be the opposite way, of course. And it says, why do the people attempting to illegally block property and business owners like Larry Cox refuse to state their company and names? Sure seems like an honest engagement to me. Why do they threaten to have people arrested and tell people they're trying to access their own property, that the fire department or the sheriff is ordering them to prevent people from accessing their own property, despite saying that the cleanup was done? Do people know they're breaking the law after the cleanup is declared done and shelter in place is lifted? While the truth, it says, and shelter in place is lifted for BioLab PR purposes, while the truth is something else. Well, he says perhaps the answer is that essentially another version of controlled burn, vent, and all in quotes, by the way, as even I got Scott to say in one of our interviews that it wasn't the controlled burn. That they can't get that piece out of the conversation. It wasn't controlled by every definition of the word. We proved that in the first couple of days, and yet it still is called a controlled burn in the corporate media. Again, the point is simply, if there's no control of oxygen, it's not a controlled burn. If you see that much smoke, it's not a controlled burn, period. You can ask anybody who knows what they're talking about. And that's why it maximized the amount of dioxins that were released, even according to Scott himself. But it says many of the most dangerous, it goes on to say, like in East Palestine, and is going on in this video I'll show you next, with the fire department and the contractor spraying water and creating what appears to be smoke in the video. Many of the most dangerous cancer-causing chemicals, e.g. like dioxins or more, are odorless, colorless, and with particle sizes the eye cannot see. So this video, as you can see, on the 18th, it even kind of floored me. So what you're going to see here, remember, and we reported this, there it is right there. Now you got a hose, but this is the same point. After this, you can see smoke. And that's Scott's thing. You can't find what you don't look for. The point is, it does appear to be smoke that's coming off of this, and that we can see, even confirmed by the corporate media, that this is still smoldering, even as of the 18th, possibly right now. And the reality is that this only happened because they sprayed water on it. Remember, their whole point was this was out. It was out. It was over. They ended everything, and all of a sudden, no, it kicked back up. That was the story. And the only reason that happened, and I kind of think that's a cover story to a degree. It's not just like the fire restarted. They essentially created some kind of a chemical reaction with the water, which causes to go crazy, which, by the way, is exactly like the Seveso discussion from Italy. It's like the exact overlap. That's exactly what happened. Time magazine calls that one of the worst disasters in the environment in history. And that was a dioxin release. That's what it was. But they don't, this is a reason they don't want you talking about this stuff. Somebody's aware of this. People know of these overlaps. It's not being allowed to be discussed. How is that possible unless they know what they're doing and they don't want you to know about it because they don't know how to deal with it, or they don't care, or maybe both? I don't know. Now, here he is testing as of the 18th. This is when he was there doing some more tests following up. Now, I'm just letting you know that's ongoing. We're going to be talking soon. Now, this is a video from the local. This is posted on the 17th. So this, some of the locals have to say. And there's a part in this that really does blow my mind. It has to do with the water. And so as of the 17th, you're going to see the water essentially bubbling green and putting something out. So to me, this goes back to the idea of the person that was whistleblowing. This is bigger than just whatever just happened with the fire. There is some massive action going on here. I remember, this is the place that was multiple issues like this over the years. And the guy who died after he gave the testimony, I'll play it for you next, he literally said that they were covering things up. He literally said that he insinuated they even started this fire to cover this up. So I get the sense there's either some massive environmental issues here that somebody either knows about and has been covering up, or that they thought they get caught for, or hopefully not, but something even bigger. I'm just giving you my gut feeling on this because everything about this points in a direction of something far more serious. And don't forget, the guy is a government entity who testified that this was a big deal, that essentially covering this up, that they were hurting the community, that people were dying, getting cancer, getting sick, and then he walks out and dies. Those are the facts. But you can read into that whatever you want. So watch this video first. We'll come back to that.
The change is welcome news. However, the community is still uneasy.
And that shelter in place lifted after more than 2 weeks. People that live and work here tell me they feel like they've been on a roller coaster ride, trying to figure out what to do next here. Some of them evacuated, came back, and then left again, feeling like they were unsafe. Now they tell me they don't know if they trust the all clear.
Yeah, you know why? Because they were getting sick. As Status Quo pointed out, Scott talked about people getting nosebleeds, headaches, chloracne, which is an obvious indication of acute exposure to dioxins. Not my opinion. That's a scientific fact. That's in the Seveso investigation from Italy. Again, one of the top 10 environmental disasters in history, according to Time magazine. That was a study that went on, and I covered this in one of the shows I'll point out in a second, so you guys can go back and get caught up if you haven't seen them, that they used that as the marker. People who had the chloracne, like a decade later, they did a study about this. And they reached out and they found out who actually got the chloracne. And they said, okay, that's the indication of acute exposure. So we're going to use you and then compare you to a control that didn't have chloracne. That's literally the entire study. And what they find, I went over it. Reproductive issues, cancers, I mean, just everything you could imagine. Women that were having like a 50% or more decrease in reproductivity. Exactly what we're talking about. Long-term issues that you would never associate with this exposure because you don't see it, you don't smell it, unless you were told by somebody like this was possible. If East Palestine ever knew that happened, they covered it up without looking, nobody would have ever connected what happened with what they were dealing with to this day. One of the first people that reached out to Scott to whistleblow about this from East Palestine, she's dead now. It's just, we need to realize how serious this actually is. And I've gone over the risks of dioxin so many times, and it still just does not seem to connect with people.
Yeah, I don't see much difference in yesterday.
The uncertainty continues.
I just kind of feel like they're just doing that.
Stanley Ham and his family just 100 yards from Biolab's toxic disaster.
Like you're a prisoner in your own home, you know what I mean? By command, you know, which I don't like that.
He says he and his parents are stuck at home, worrying about the long-term effects of breathing in chemicals.
At first, you know, like I said, they were saying that they didn't think it was harmful. The first time I inhaled it, you know, I ended up, my throat burned for like a couple of days, and I kept having headaches.
Right now around Biolab in the nearby pond, green water is still bubbling. Machinery is near.
Look at how fast you just skipped. What do you mean green water is still bubbling? What the hell is that? What is that? What is that? Is that because of the fire? Like, what a casual jump over that. Do your job. What is that? What are we talking? So to me, that is an ongoing issue that's just because of this lab, or because of the company that is dumping toxic things that people were trying to tell you about. Green water bubbling up in the water. Guys, there's something much worse happening here. I mean, watch that again.
A couple of days. And
around Biolab in the nearby pond, green water is still bubbling.
I mean, look, what are you seeing right there? You can see a pipe sticking out of the water, and you see something spraying out of that. This is as of the 17th, guys. It's the 20th. This thing happened in late September, like the end of September. I'm kind of blown away by that.
Right now around Biolab in the nearby pond, green water is still bubbling. Machinery is nearby, and the air quality is being monitored. Yeah, monitored for things that are not the risk at this point. They're monitoring for chlorine and associated compounds. Now, yeah, that maybe means dioxins, but I doubt that's what it means. And even if it did, they're not showing us this or even mentioning the word. So let's realize that it's not an honest engagement. But if you're testing for chlorine, which, by the way, would have dissipated by now, obviously, you're not going to find anything. And this is what that's why Scott's point is you will not find what you don't look for. The dioxins are an obvious, immediate problem that will then be there for at least a couple of decades. It has a decade half-life inside the human body. It collects in the fats of animals in the area that then people consume. I mean, this is the reason this has been a problem for decades, that even CNN and different groups were screaming about hundreds of times the levels in your fast food in 1995, and nobody's done anything about it. The chlorine companies pushed back and were like, well, we don't know. We can't just push back on all of them. And everyone stood back, and I guess we just ignored it. Good old USA style, right?
Killed all those fish out in the water. I felt like we were being lied to, just like I feel like we.
By pond, green water is still bubbling. Machinery is nearby, and the air quality is being monitored.
Killed all those fish out in the water. I felt like we were being lied to, just like I feel like we're going to be lied to from this point forward.
While this community wants to hear more from Biolab, they're nowhere to be found.
We extended an invitation to Biolab to participate in this press conference. And quite frankly, I think it's a slap in the face.
You see, think about this, guys. So we're talking about the reality. We're talking about the reality that you are now in a position, whether it's Norfolk Southern or Biolab, because Norfolk Southern did the same thing. Now, that story got a hell of a lot more attention. I mean, I guess I see why, because ultimately the dynamic included the train, included a major company, included the rush to get it back going, what was on the train. There's a lot going on there, which I think, or just the large event and the smoke. But I mean, similar thing happened here with the smoke that went all over. I just don't get what the draw is, why it gets different draw. I think some of them are partisan, politicized. I think that's usually why. But the point is that either one, Norfolk did the same thing for a very long time. They just refused to show up. So how do they get away with this? You literally, or whether it's by, incompetence, whatever, it's your responsibility. This is your company and people are getting hurt by this. And you don't even show up. I mean, that shouldn't even be allowed. Like this should be some kind of, this is my point about if these groups were acting the way that they claim they do, whether the EPA or whatever else, there would be some kind of immediate mechanism where you're on the hook here. You're paying for this. You have to answer these questions. Like, why not? Because there's a fascistic overlap for corporations in your government today, and they're the same thing. They don't care about you. End of story. Sorry to make that so blunt. It's the reality.
Frustration is boiling.
And quite frankly, I think is a slap in the face.
The county's frustration is boiling over too.
I feel like the citizens and business owners who have been held hostage for the last 19 days deserve to hear directly from the leadership and the corporate management of BioLab.
It's not, they deserve it, but that's not that they deserve it. How is it not legally obligated? How are they not legally obligated to a deal with the problem? Like, imagine it like this, that you're in a car accident or something that's just you and in your current circumstances, and you get in a problem or you start a problem or you spill something and you just walk away and go, well, that's not my fault. It happened to you. Is that how the world works for you? Well, obviously not. You're responsible. Somebody will track you down and say, you did that. That's your car. You caused the crash. But not when you're a corporation that makes a lot of money and then has, lobbyists and people inside, or maybe you have somebody that your cousins in the government. This is just how this works. I'm just assuming, right? Or just, theoretically kind of considering what might be causing that. My point is that something is. I don't know for sure what it is, but how is it possible that we're in a position where they're not obligated to handle a situation that they're responsible for when this is not even the first time?
Now, even when we've reached out to BioLab to try and get some answers here, we have not gotten those answers that we're desperately seeking for all of you guys at home. And they're supposed to be answering the community's questions at the assistance center right here. But Ham tells me he doesn't know if he trusts that either. Again, that shelter in place has been lifted. Rockdale County schools say they go back to in-person learning on Monday. We're live in Conyers. Angelina Salcido, 11 Alive News.
I don't actually think that I have his video, and I don't want to track it down right now, but if you guys remember, I bet you I can find it really quickly on an article. Let's see. It should pop up, I imagine. Yeah, here it is. Or just one of them anyway. So I'll include this so you at least give you guys something to go on. But the video, I'll try and find it if I remember after the show, which I'll probably forget, to be honest. But I'll try and track it down, because what he does is very clear. He's in the actual interview, or rather the testimony. He's short of breath, and he goes, "Oh, and I catch my breath." Which, by the way, every indication. I mean, you could easily make an argument that he got injections. Maybe that would be causing it, or maybe something else happened. It was not connected at all. Or it could be that he had acute exposure to these dioxin releases because he was there dealing with it. And nobody's telling him what's going on. He probably doesn't even know that's part of the problem. But at the end of the day, he was trying to ring the bell. He was trying to get your attention. He was saying that he clearly insinuated that they might have started this fire to cover up the fact that they were trying to get an investigation, that people are protesting to get him out of the county, and that they have done this many, many times. And he was stressing this fact, and they're dangerous and people are getting hurt. And then he walks out and dies within very short time period after leaving the building. Rockdale County Soil and Water Supervisor collapses, dies shortly after speaking about BioLab chemical plume. Hard not to feel that there's something going on there. So next part, here is a local article. Again, this one is from the 17th of October. We're being lied to. Family yards away from BioLab disaster wants answers after shelter in place lifted. Here is one from October 3rd. Now, this comes directly from AIHA, and that was, again, let me make sure I got the name right. Oh, where was it again? It's basically the group that, where was it again? I thought it had, there it is, the American Industrial Hygiene Association. But this is a group that put out a update. Says CBS to investigate September 29th chemical fire at Georgia facility. Only 1 point or 2 points really want to show you. It says the fire has been extinguished but the material at the facility was still smoldering as of the 3rd. So here's the crazy part. So the 29th, and then it's still smoldering on the 3rd. Scott said it was still smoldering at, I think, like the 12th or 13th. So it's just still happening. That just does not make sense unless there's something much weirder going on here, like something they can't control, and they're not letting you know that. But Scott was the one that said that, and he just left the area. And I'll show you that again, actually, on some of the other things we're looking at. Then it goes on to say both state and federal agencies, including EPA, are monitoring air quality in the area for chlorine and related compounds. I was just mentioning that point. And it says some exceedances above the action level for chlorine were detected on the 3rd. So even think about that. So think about the amount of chlorine that had to have been released and burned. And realize when it burns, that's what's turning it into dioxins, especially with the plastic pallets and everything else that was in there, the plastics in general. But on the 3rd, from the 29th to the 3rd, and they're still talking about dangerous levels of chlorine in the air. So think about how much had to have been released if, 4 or 5 days later, we're talking about chlorine still being dangerous in the air? That's not, and imagine the level of dioxins if we're actually being honest about this conversation, if chlorine was still being found in the air. Now, this one is on the next, I think the October 4th, next day, from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, local paper, and it says, Rockdale County officials said that the plume is changing colors as workers remove debris. On the 4th, chlorine odor. This is crazy. I mean, this is not as simple as a fire, whether chlorine or not. There's just no way in my mind. And it says hazy skies and an odor of chlorine have persisted. The fire has been extinguished, but smoke continues to rise. This is the next day. Due to the pool chemicals produced at the plant reacting with the water that was used to contain the blaze. How is that still happening? So you mean you're still spraying water on this that still causes the smoke? I don't understand. So to me, if you keep reading it, you're going, this just doesn't add up. Something's not being given to you. That would be my first thought. Something's being left out of the story that would go, oh, okay, that's why that makes sense. Why are they? I don't know. But something is amiss here, and I'm waiting for Scott's results to find more out. But this is how it ultimately started, and this is reported in the beginning. They sprayed it with the water, not knowing what was there. And don't forget, what's his name again? The one I just mentioned, the Rockdale County, the supervisor who was testifying, who died. One of the things he said is, where is the MSDS sheet? The material safety data sheet, or MSDS. Because I think the point is, they didn't want, if they would have been able to know what was in the plant before they started spraying water, they would have maybe known what might have reacted, but they didn't, which seems like a deliberate action. There's a reason he brought that up. Sure wish we could talk to him. Now it says chemicals released from the Conyers fire include chlorine, chloramine, and chlorine compounds, according to Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency. Additionally, bromine, another chemical used in spa and pool treatment. We've talked about all these. All these are dangerous in their own right as an alternative to chlorine and has a bleach-like odor, and was detected though at lower levels. Specifically, Georgia Tech professor Sally, I think Ning, said a system known as the Atmospheric Science and Chemistry Measurement Network detected a 14,000 times increase in the amount of chlorine-containing particles in the air, and a 170 time increase in the amount of bromine containing particles in the air over Decantor on Monday morning. Monday morning. Typically, there is little of either in the air. 1,400 time increase in the amount of chlorine containing particles. Is that a way to say dioxin? I mean, think about that. What's chlorine containing particles? I mean, that's obvious what it means. I'm just saying that that's a opaque way to say that. And 1,400 times any dangerous chemical is obviously not a good thing. My point again. Now, that's either a way to say that without saying dioxins or meaning chlorine. And if it means the chlorine particles, again, imagine if that is the stuff that didn't burn and it's 1,400 times more. Imagine what the dioxins are that were burned. And it says bromine exposure is also it can be toxic, the symptoms of which are similar to chlorine exposure. Good. Oh, fantastic. So this is just obviously a problem. And again, the bromine was 170 times. Now, on that note, actually, let's just quickly we've talked about it before, but let's just give you the quick, what it says right here on Wikipedia about it. So it's a chemical element Volatile red-brown liquid, room temperature, it evaporates readily to form a similarly colored vapor. Oh, fantastic. Its properties are intermediate between those of chlorine and iodine. Interesting. In the chat, if anything pops into your mind, you think it's interesting. Isolated independently by two chemicals. Oh, chemists, excuse me. Very reactive and does not occur at a free element in nature. Instead, it can be isolated from colorless, soluble, crystalline material. Nothing is standing out. Let's go down to the... usually there's a negative effects. Some kind of a toxicity. Suggests that bromine is a necessary cofactor in the biosynthesis of collagen. Nevertheless, its biological role is toxic and causes chemical burns on the human flesh. Inhaling bromine gas results in similar irritation of the respiratory tract, causing coughing, choking, shortness of breath. That might have been what the guy was experiencing in the immediate aftermath, and death if inhaled in large amounts. Wow. Okay. Chronic exposure may lead to frequent bronchial infections and a general deterioration of health. I mean, is that not? I mean, obviously, it's an easy thing to see that they're going to hurt your health. But when it gets more specific about like immune suppression and reproductivity, that's what everything we're dealing with seems to lean in that direction, which I find hard to miss. As a strong oxidizing agent, bromine is incompatible with most organic and inorganic compounds. Caution is required when transporting bromine. Yeah, seemingly. It is commonly carried in steel tanks. I'll leave it there. Just been curious if you want to look more into that. I'll include that for you. And then lastly here, under is this toxic? It says the CDC didn't answer questions. That's not a joke. The CDC didn't answer questions about the possible health impacts from chemical release. Instead, a spokesman said they'd refer to Gemma, one of the other groups, which is leading the emergency response. Oh, because you need to ask the ones leading it to know what general chemicals might cause. Do you not realize how every one of these agencies seem to be on damage control like forever now? They're just like, you're the enemy and anything we give you is going to be used against us. Why? Because that's how criminals think. I mean, think about this. That is the Center for Disease Control Prevention, a group that in many cases, the overlap, obviously it's more the EPA. My point is that they would have an answer to this. They would have insight into how these things might affect your body. And when they were reached out to for comment, they wouldn't respond. And instead, no, ask them. That seems crazy to me. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. And it says, however, on its informational website, see, that's even more crazy. So the CDC has a website where you can look this stuff up, and yet they still refuse to give you the answer. They note that exposure to chlorine can cause burning of the eyes, nose, throat, and can lead to headaches, nausea, and choking. Now, that's just chlorine by itself without being burned into dioxins. Now, Cody Alcorn, a journalist at 11 Live, looks like a local channel. He posted on the 18th, as BioLab continues. So this is now on the 18th. So the 4th. Right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. The 17th was the report. They're saying that BioLab refused to show up. Now, I would argue that was recorded probably a couple of days before that, posted on the 17th. Either way, the point is that BioLab has yet to show up, unless it's happening right now or recording, to speak to people who they have allowed to get sick. And arguably, there seems to be evidence suggesting that it might have in some way been more than just an accident, according to testimony from whistleblower who is now dead. As BioLab continues to dodge news conferences and refuses to answer questions from the disaster that closed schools, businesses, and displaced families in Rockdale County, their crisis management PR firms issues generic copy-paste press releases. Why? Because they can. Nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. And so why would they engage? The more they give you, the more they're responsible. Just like Norfolk Southern. If they acknowledge the issue, well, they're more responsible. But if they quietly expand it and spread it as far as possible while deflecting blame, well, it only takes a matter of time before you go, oh, that's just background noise. You mean all the way over there, another state? Yeah, it's not because of us. That's just been there. This is a tactic that we've seen used again and again. There's two things that can happen. You can own up to it and maximize your liability and minimize harm, or you can maximize harm and spread it out as much as you can and minimize your own liability. What do you think businesses will do, especially when the governments allow it to happen? Probably because they're a revolving door, and they're going to be there next. Now, here is an article from the 19th, yesterday. Protesters demand shutdown of Conyers biolab plant, which, by the way, has been going on a really long time. There's entire groups that have been pushing for this. I just showed you one last show that we talked about this, where they've been protesting this for a long time, falling on deaf ears, apparently, because people have been getting sick and been harmed by this long before this fire. Now, the other day I told you I wasn't referencing any lawyers because, and at the same point here, what he said I found interesting. I want to stress, I don't know this guy's background. I don't know if he's an honest lawyer. I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that if you end up leaning into this guy because you're in Georgia, I don't know whether he's good or bad or up, down, and whatever. But just first impression, he seems to be putting this out there and saying that if you have any issues, reach out to him. But I thought what he said was interesting, and he seems to be a local guy as opposed to just some lawyer out there trying to capitalize on this. But either way, he's a lawyer. Let's just leave it at that. But the law office of Mahdi Abdur Rahman. Now, I'll play his video. He says, if you or someone you know have been adversely affected by the chemical fire in BioLab in Conyers, Georgia, complete the link below and reach out to him. But here's what he had to say. This is a local lawyer from the area who's speaking out about what's going on.
Good morning, everyone. Attorney Mahdi here. I just wanted to tap in and, continue to provide updates for this chemical fire case with BioLab in Conyers, Georgia. We are continuing to work on this case day in and day out. We do have a couple of updates, but the most important thing is I want to continue to remind everyone that if you are experiencing any symptoms from being exposed to the chemicals from the fire, please seek medical attention. The concentration of chemicals that you were exposed to is abnormal. And when I say abnormal, meaning human beings are not intended to be exposed to these type of chemicals, especially at these concentration levels.
Or any.
We know that at least as of Tuesday and Wednesday, Conyers, Georgia, or Rockdale County was still under a shelter-in-place order. So that must suggest that there are harmful elements in the Tuesday and Wednesday. We know that at least as of Tuesday and Wednesday, Conyers, Georgia, or Rockdale County was still under a shelter-in-place order. So that must suggest that there are harmful elements in the environment. If something is going to be harmed, then the question is, what is that? That's going to be your health. So in any other circumstance, when you have some type of harm to your health, you go see a doctor. However, we're not seeing any direction from the local, state, and possibly not even the federal government stating that if you are experiencing these symptoms, that you need to see a doctor. So I want to remind everyone that your personal health is most important. If you're experiencing any symptoms, please go and see a doctor and continue to stay safe.
Right. Think about that. I mean, really take a minute and recognize the small point he made there. You're at a point now where people are clearly suffering, and whether it's a headache or bloody nose, which all have happened. Aren't they supposed to be the ones that are, the government, local especially, should be saying, make sure you check this out because we know there's a problem here? The fact is that, my opinion, just like I was just saying, the reason that's not happening is because they don't, the least they can engage, the least liability you'll find. Because if you go to them and say, go to the doctor, you might be sick. Well, guess what? Then they're going to go, I think I might be sick. And somebody's going to take care of this. But if you don't deal with it, they may just brush it off as a headache. They may just pretend like it's a bloody nose. I mean, my opinion about government in general, pretty damn jaded. But you have to acknowledge that this is pretty abnormal for what we're told these people are supposed to be doing. I think that's pretty wild. And again, we're not talking about, the same thing happened in East Palestine, where they got sick and then were told to go get tested, and then they went and got tested and they were refused dioxin tests. I don't know how you misunderstand that. It's obvious what part of this they're trying to cover up. In this case, they being the immediate location, Norfolk Southern on the ground, the work of the local EPA and the federal EPA, or local elements of that. And then the federal EPA was present as well from the very beginning. And they tried to hide that fact. These stories have been obviously corrupt from the beginning. And that's why it's not some kind of bombastic story. Immediately, it was obvious there was something very fishy going on, which was why I left open, that I still do, that there was another part of that story that we just still don't know. Something else on these trains that they wanted to get the hell out of there before it was recognized. I don't know. I really don't know, but something stands out as there's a red flag in there that seems to be something we don't know. Again, that they rushed out and they laid the track down over the top of what's spilled and then had to dig it back up. Why would they do that? It seems obvious that it was about minimizing their fallout, while maximizing yours, which is always the case. So I'm going to include,
I mean, certainly the Zionists have used it.
I just bumped that on accident. I'm going to include the shows we did over the last couple of week or so. Conyers, Georgia Biolab, and this is oh, that was the older one. So this is the first one here from the 10th. Georgia dioxin risk 6 times greater than East Palestine. That's according to Scott Smith. That was his early estimate. And of course, then also U.S. journalist taken hostage by Israel. That's Jeremy, that no one seems to want to talk about. Conyers, Georgia Biolab could be the greatest dioxin disaster in history. Now, that's again, according to Scott. This guy, he is a well-respected expert. And he's covered pretty, I mean, you name some of these largest disasters you've heard of. He's one of the people that's usually been there. And I mean, I say that only because there's a lot of disasters you can point to. But the large ones, Scott was there. He has a long history of going to these and very clearly highlighting what they tend to cover up, just like with East Palestine. Now, before we move on to the next segment, and I will be keeping up on this, by the way, as much as I can, and whatever I see, send me things. If you got people inside information, if you're local there, reach out to me. You know, I'm not going to promise I'm going to engage with everybody, but ultimately I want to make sure I'm covering the ongoing story because I guarantee there's something going on here. The level is what want to find out. To what level is there a problem? And I'm going to be following up with Scott as soon as he gets back to me with his results, and we'll do our best to keep up on this for you. Now, this, of course, is just another example. Now, just like last time, I don't think that it's appropriate, especially like after East Palestine, there was a moment where the partisan media was jumping at every smoke, every story, every train crash, which, we shouldn't ignore anything. Consider all of them, but a lot of them were just a random thing. At least that's how it appeared. But nonetheless, there were people that saw something there, right? They got a lot of clicks when they pointed at these stories. And so they started hyping all of them. Oh, here's another disaster. Here's another fire. And I think that's how this tends to go. Like you decide for yourself out there what you think is important. I think we need to show some discernment and recognize that not everything falls into these categories. My point in this one, just like the last one afterward, the Richmond one, is another dynamic where it's almost a guarantee that there is a release. But the question is how much. And the reason being, just like Scott would tell you if he was on the show today, that when we're talking about specifically recycling plants, which are packed full of plastics and different pallets, and the combination of with wood and paper as well is a guaranteed dioxin release. That's the same thing with East Palestine and different dynamics we've talked about, or the different stories. Sevesto we've talked about from Italy. So this one is from the 16th. Shelter in place was issued as numerous firefighters respond to a massive fire, which you can see here. Look at that. A lot of smoke. Look at that, guys. You see all those things right there? See all those things right there? All those packed blocks full of plastic? There is no question. Dioxin release. No question. Now, different than chlorine, I argue the chlorine being the main factor for what causes these. So the chlorine itself was a worst example of the overlap. But I'll see if I can pull this real quickly. I think it pops right up. Yeah, I'll include this study for you, which is an important one from 2001, which says, again, since every molecule of dioxin contains 2 or more atoms of chlorine, chlorine is an absolute necessity for dioxin formation. Therefore, when no chlorine is present, no dioxins are formed. The point is that these plastics have I'm forgetting the term on the, I forget the term, but the acronym, which it's a derivative of this, and it does very clearly cause dioxins. So now we have another example on the 16th. So I'm only including this, obviously, because we should be continuing to look into this, and maybe we can, somebody can go test this as well, and I'd be wanting to hear what you had to say, is that I can't stop seeing this, okay, whether or not you want to see this as a connected thing, I have no reason to think that, but I also agree that there's reason to consider that. The amount of dioxins being released, it's like, okay, to make this as clear as possible, we're all worried right now where this goes in regard to some larger concept about whether it's like people talk about depopulation, which, I consider as much as I think I can. And sometimes I think it's highlighted when it doesn't need to be. My point is it's obviously something we shouldn't ignore, or other larger conversations of technocracy, the Great Reset, these things that in many cases, eugenics even, are very anti-human perspective. That out of everything that I've talked about and everything that we can highlight, I think it needs to be stated very clearly that dioxins are the worst part of it. That's not a debate. DCDD, which is what we're talking about, is the most dangerous chemical in existence, according to all the scientists and chemists and everybody we've talked to. There's articles written about it. So if we know that, and we're watching these things continue to go massive dioxin releases, and we're not even mentioning the word, is that either, again, because they just literally don't know what to do, or is it something bigger going on? It's up for you to decide, but look at how much is happening. All right, and you could probably map these locations from when these events happen to show it a rapid increase, almost exponential, I would argue, in cancers, in reproductive issues, in immune system problems. I mean, just off the charts. And then stand back and look at the larger area around East Palestine, Conyers, Arkansas, every one of these, and ask yourself whether we're seeing why everyone gets. Right now, I think it's 1 in every 2 people in this country will have cancer at one point in their life. That's not normal. I don't know why we ever pretended that would make sense. So all I'm saying is this kind of stuff, we just need to start paying attention to what these show you, even if it's just a random thing, and recognize that something should be happening, whether that means we stop allowing these plants to exist, start changing the chemicals and not allowing the ones that are capable of causing these, or just get rid of everything that could cause this problem. Because this is not some kind of climate change dynamic. These are immediately dangerous things that are being used haphazardly at your expense. That's something we should all care about. So here is a local one from this, just saying dark plume of smoke from Rogers fire seen as Rogers, Arkansas, seen for miles around. Reports say recycling center evacuated. Just one after another, guys. Now, before we move on to the next segment, this Orwell sent me this. I just found this to be crazy. This is a study from 2020. The cost of stratospheric aerosol injection through 2100, the year 2100. This is crazy. And realize that's geoengineering. The conspiracy theory to some people still mind-blowing that that's even still the case. The cost of stratospheric aerosol injection. Now it says the paper presents the estimated direct cost of geoengineering, specific form of it, but it's geoengineering, through the end of the century. Now, here's the crazy part about this. The idea is that, why they're doing this? Because it's already been shown that the mindset, the objective they have with this will cause a situation where it might cause what they think it's going to cause in a positive way, but ultimately I argued and thinking about the brain can see that it's not necessary because what they're arguing is a falsehood from its core, but we are clearly hurting the planet. My point, though, is that the scientific research has shown that, yes, we can drop this by 1-2 degrees, but once you start that process, you can't ever stop it. Once you stop it, it causes a cataclysmic kind of fallout from that. That's not my opinion. I've seen many studies on this, and yet their argument is, well, we're all going to die soon anyway. So that's the mindset of this cataclysmic climate change. We have to do it, otherwise we're going to be dead anyway. Well, I disagree with you. You're literally setting us up in a situation where we will then be in that situation. You're causing that to be the case. That's probably the whole point. But so that's why they're mapping this out. And I'll show you the amount down at the bottom. It displays, they say, a range of future solar geoengineering deployment scenarios. Well, it's funny. I bet you somebody right when I started this was already pushing back on the word geoengineering. Too late. It's right there. It's just funny how these people that have identified what they call conspiracy theory are, they'll start calling the people writing the study the conspiracy theorists because they're so dead set on saying this isn't real because they were taught that, even though it's literally happening. But it says they're intended to reduce anthropologically caused radiative forcing beginning in 2035, which, by the way, is simply another long-winded way of saying global warming. That's all it means. Human-caused global warming, which, by the way, I don't believe is a real thing. Not in the sense that we can't hurt this planet, but the idea that you existing and your carbon is causing guys, we need to realize how silly this whole thing is. What's problematic, sort of like when we saw during the conversation of COVID-19 illusion, that the very people that were screaming that we had to take change, we're going to die in 2 years, suddenly started using 10 masks and 4 pair of gloves every day. Yeah, oops. Couldn't think about that one, did we? You were so scared of your fake thing. My point, though, is that we suddenly missed the forest for the trees. right? That we are hurting the planet. That's without question. But because you're focusing on something that is illusory, you're missing the fact that you're still doing that, or that your militarists burn pits and catastrophic events around the world, or the fact that the warfare they conduct is the biggest cause of all of that stuff by far. But, because freedom or whatever, and we just pretend it's ridiculous. We're ridiculous. The point is that they're going to use this to push in the idea that they need to do this because they're saving your life, when ultimately they seem to be causing what they think they're fighting, or maybe they know that. But beginning in 2035. Now, cutting to the chase, it says the program relies on right here. Relative to other climate interventions and solutions, stratospheric aerosol injection, geoengineering, remains inexpensive, but at about $18 billion a year per degree Celsius of warming avoided. What a ridiculous thing to say. Now, realize how silly this is, because this is how they always love to work. Sort of like, it would have been worse if you didn't get it. How do we know? I'll take your word for it. But the point is that per degree of warming avoided, right? So if it doesn't warm, hey, $18 billion well spent, or not at all, or it just didn't happen and it wouldn't have either way. It's sort of like you're saying, if nothing happens, then it's working. It just seems like it's ridiculous to me. But either way, I think it's important to recognize that it's $18 billion a year per 1 degree. That's a lot of money. A solar geoengineering program. So all they're telling you right now is we don't have a say in this. And the other point was they try to pretend that it's sulfates alone. That's not what it is. It's not just salt. We've talked about the aluminum, the barium. Now they'll admit that and just claim that's the salt or whatever, but it's not. This is like claiming that what's in the injections is just, what was the other term? The same point. Something that is benign, when in reality it's got 14 other ingredients in it they don't tell you about. That's the point. And these things are dangerous for you. I mean, studies point out in the past about the aluminum and barium there in the UK, and in the Alzheimer's is through the roof. And that's an immediate overlapping cause for that. Gee, I wonder what's going on. Sort of like the cancers we have when they're dumping cancerous chemicals in everything that you put in your body and wear and think and breathe. Must just be a coincidence. Now, lastly, in this segment, I just want to include this. This is from the 8th of October. Combined COVID flu vaccines are coming. Moderna's cleared the and you guys already know this. It's not news to you, but the sad reality is, just let's reflect. Maybe there's somebody new in the chat. Reflect on how we were. I mean, we're psychic. It wasn't even that hard to see coming, because they've been promoting this kind of idea. But during the height of the fervor around the COVID-19 illusion, a lot of us were saying this. This is all about the agenda. This is about the platform. This is about the universal flu, the combination injections. And people were gone, conspiracy theory. Well, here we are. And this is combining two things that are already hurting people. Now, yeah, that actually includes the flu shot, because it's a true statement. Whether it's one person out of everyone ever taking it or half of them, it still can hurt you. The point, though, is that when you actually look at the numbers around the flu shots themselves, there's a lot of fallout from that, too. Pales in comparison to the deadly COVID shot, but there's still myocarditis overlap. So my point, though, is that you're taking these things, and on top of that, I haven't actually gone through this in depth. I grabbed it toward the end, but I plan on it, because I want to find out what kind of flu shot and so on. Is we know the COVID is mRNA, and that's what it says right here. mRNA shots. So I'm going to go ahead and argue that we're talking about an mRNA flu shot combined with an mRNA COVID shot, which, by the way, is not mRNA. Ladies and gentlemen, you know this. It is mod RNA. That's not hypothetical or a guess. That's for a fact. It's modified RNA. It's M1 methyl pseudouridine modified RNA is what it is. And that's one of the clear reasons this is dangerous for you and why it stays in your body and all the things we talked about. But guess what? They're going to do it anyway, because that was always the plan. Well before we ever started this was always the plan. So it doesn't matter that they killed so many people and Trump still lies about it and people that want to support him still ignore that. They're going to do it anyway. I just think that is wild, but we need to be, as long as we're informed, we can make an informed decision. Now, let's talk about that overlap. Brad Miller has been really pushing this in a good way, this point that I really want people to see, that I just, some people, I get, and I understand it. I get why people in a desperate feeling, in a bad place because of what they've put you in, want to see a positive sign in somebody, want to believe that this one person, this one vote, this one party is going to change everything. I get it. But it happens every single time. And I hope I'm wrong. I literally, with everything in my body, hope that you're right, that he is going to be the one to change everything for the better. I pray that's the case. But everything in my body tells me otherwise. All the facts we've seen, all the precedents, all the things that already happened, the word, the overlaps, the associations, the funding, everything tells me the opposite. Now, that's not even getting into what the other, that's the thing I want to say again that I've said many times. Pointing out a problem does not necessitate a solution. Yes, we should go to that next. We should talk about what else we could do, what else, who we should vote for, whether you should vote at all. But first and foremost, acknowledge and engage with the problem. As always, the whole thing is you can't solve a problem until you first acknowledge that one exists. So immediately the question is, well, what would you do then? Who would you vote for? Oh, that's not going to, and you immediately fall back in your position because you already feel like there's no solution. That's not acknowledging the problem. That's ignoring the problem. And again, the idea that the person pointing out a problem also has to be the one to have a solution, that it's just an illogical mindset. It is a fallacy that is meant to drive you back into your position. Excuse me. So, as Brad says, to my fellow Americans, we can't allow ourselves to be lulled back to sleep and forget the intentional treason committed against this country via the COVID op. And by the way, even if you think that Trump was fooled, which I could still keep an open mind in that possibility, but it doesn't explain why he would still be lying about it. I could just say hubris. But my point is that whether or not he was fooled, listened to the wrong people, all the things everyone loves to say right now to make it sound like this one will be the one, you still have to acknowledge that it happened. But that's his whole point. People are, we saw Robert Malone and the rest of them start aggressively pushing back, kind of aimed at our whole IMA thing, to be honest, about saying that, forget the COVID op. He built his whole thing around that. And now we're supposed to just forget about it because, well, Trump's our only choice. Guys, that's childish logic. Now he says a big part of that op was conducted by our own military, he says. And remember, I'll see if I'll bring that interview up. Brad's a great guy. He was one of the first interviews we had in the studio here. This might be the first one, actually. Yeah, this is the original one from the 2023. 101st Airborne Battalion Commander relieved of command for refusing the COVID shot. Now, that is what it looks like to stand by your principles, which a lot of people are forgetting right now as we go into the election and the Israel overlap. Here it is. I'll include both these. Oops. Dang it. Man, Twitter is so ridiculous. I'm going to get into it in a second because I have a whole section on this today. I don't know if for the podcast, it won't make sense, but as I'm just scrolling back and forth, Twitter has a thing where you see I just went back. I hit back on accident, and now it won't let me go back. It won't let me go to the page I was just on because Twitter's stuff. Twitter right now is weird and on its face, like manipulative and social engineering. It's really crazy. Now, obviously, it was going on before Elon Musk. But it's just so strange. I'll come back to it. Keep that in thought or in your mind. Let me grab these interviews for you real quick. What I mean is, you see what I'm talking about is it comes to things where it won't let certain things happen. And I think it's about specific stuff like suppression based on accounts or even just like keywords and algorithmic things. I really believe that. What I was trying to do is grab this one too, and I hit the wrong button and it wouldn't let me go back. Okay, so here's both the interviews for Brad. Now, this one we just had in the studio. And we get into this a lot. We talk about the idea as it's a declaration of military accountability, which he had something he put out, and foreign influence over U.S. policy. He sees it, man. He really does. Now, it goes on to say, regardless of which senior military leaders knew the full scope of the plan, they all participated, which resulted in millions of Americans killed, injured, and otherwise harmed. They all have willingly participated in the slaughter of this nation that hasn't ended and is still occurring. To the currently serving active duty generals and admirals, every single one of you, without exception, is a total coward, unworthy of your rank, positions, authorities, and responsibilities. So remember, 101st Airborne is a highly respected position, right? So the point is, if he didn't care about his principles, he would still hold that position and be very influential in the military. And so he has a standing to speak on these things. And he says, you all are a disgrace to both the uniform and the flag. Many of you should face charges. He says, as a group, you have desecrated the Constitution, broken federal laws, and enabled the Diminution. I don't think I've seen that before. Like, I think like diminishing. Yeah. Diminution of military readiness from within. You have killed or injured many troops entrusted to your charge. You either directly and knowingly engaged in operations designed to destroy this country's citizens, military, and institutions, or willingly participated, even once it was clear that the intent was. What the intent was. You have severed the trust of the American people in ways that may take generations to restore. You didn't just abandon your country when it needed you most, but actively sided against her. This nation has been under direct attack for the last few years. The worst perpetrators came from within our own government, and some of them wear military uniforms. We can't forget that. We can't forget that we are still in this war. I mean, that's the whole statement you've heard many times, right? Foreign and domestic. You know, there's a reason that was included, because the founding fathers, at least at that point, and some of them arguably could see that threat even then. Now, here's the next one. Let's play the clip first, and I'll read you what he says. Here's Trump recently speaking, and you know, it's this whole kind of glomming onto the RFK momentum, and you know, we're going to remove the toxins, and we're going to fight against bad things and make America healthy again. It's these are platitudes. They're statements that mean nothing, in my opinion. I mean, frankly. I mean, again, just to be clear, for those that only see this one, whether it's Kamala or Biden or anybody else, all of them are just blatant liars that will say what you want to hear and not follow through. And if you think Trump's any different, then you weren't paying attention over the last however many years. Because the reality is the same thing about JFK and lock her up and the Federal Reserve and all blah, 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 all these things. And I'll make points about this in a second. But this is the same thing. So at the very least, if you're objective, you should say, well, let's wait and see, because he didn't follow through last time.
Honored to receive 2 endorsements of former Democrats for President, Tulsi Gabbard. And
now, again, I just want to say one more time. I think it is really ridiculous, worthy of ridicule, to be you're a former Democrat. So are you no longer believing in all of the tenets you've built your entire career around? Because you realize it's not just as simple as going, I'm this side now and the same ideals. No. We're supposed to pretend that they're very different. The Republicans and Democrats have a very different set of ideals. So you're just suddenly shifted entirely? Or are you still believing in those ideals, but you just think the Republican Party is better? Well, that means you're a Democrat that's supporting the Republicans. You see how stupid this is? They are all the same thing. I hope that's clear.
Former Democrats for President, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Together we're fighting to secure our borders, end the endless foreign wars, and defend the...
Except Israel, though, right? Because we'll support them all the way, no matter what. I guess he forgot that part of his speech.
Working people of America. We're joining forces to defeat government corruption, restore free speech, and make America healthy again. We're going to make America healthy again, you know?
Oh, he loves saying that, right? It's different now. It's a new mantra, but it's because they want to hear that. And that's why he's saying it. Simple as that. Whether it ever happens or not.
We're going to get toxic chemicals out of our environment, and we're going to...
Except we're putting them in your body, though. Keep the shots, because he still supports them.
Get them out of our food supply.
Nope, not at all. I'll show you that right now. Here's Donald Trump handing out McDonald's, because that's the good food we want to lean into, right? Remember the stores they kept open, the small businesses like Burger King and McDonald's? It's all a facade, guys.
We're going to get them out of our bodies.
Wow. Right. So they're literally running on this now, right? Because that's what's connecting. Now, by the way, I do want to say one thing about, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that it's wrong of somebody to switch to become a Democrat or to change their ideals. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, from a political perspective, when you're running on these ideals and you're trying to sell people on what you are your entire career and then just jump to the other side, that's my point. If you decide you want to think something different on a dime, that's completely up to you as an individual. As a politician, I would even say it would, if you genuinely believe that, then sure. But I don't think that's what's happening, especially since what they are and what they're saying and doing is the same. They're just simply jumping teams. I hope that's clear. So here's what Brad said. Yet no mention whatsoever of justice for the treason that occurred via the COVID op. An op that Kennedy himself referred to as a global coup d'etat in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Right, but I guess it's easy as going, well, Trump was tricked. Okay, moving forward. Is that how simple it is? He was tricked. It's a coup d'etat of everything, but it was just an accident that he got misled. How are we this simple? or the top that he still supports the injection and says that it was a monumental success and people saved their lives. And that's not what RFK thinks. How is that? How do you reconcile that if you were supporting this team? He says, once again, Americans are urged to move forward and just forget the attacks on our fellow citizens, our wealth, our institutions. Again, one of the largest, if not the largest transfer of wealth in this country's history took place under COVID-19. We saw the BlackRock sellout. It was crazy. He says, this is exactly what we did with 9/11, Gulf of Tonkin, death of JFK, etc. I agree with him. And don't forget every single one you just mentioned there. I mean, maybe for the save for the Gulf of Tonkin, but I'm sure I could find some connections. There's an overlap, obviously, there. And he says, we're being told the lie that the poisonous tree will render good fruit from here forward. It's a good way to put that. The poison that harms the tree is not addressed. Right. It's a very, very good point. And here's another one. Libs of TikTok says, this is going to go down in history as the photo that won him the election. Literally, for her, I'd make sure it was real. Apparently it's real. He's at a McDonald's, working at McDonald's because he's a normal guy just like you, right? It's just so funny how easy it is to play some small-minded people. But the point is nothing says make America healthy again like McDonald's, right, guys? How silly. I mean, you have to realize that if you're going to push the idea of toxic chemicals in your food, this is number one on the list, fast food. And you know, everything that they sell, everything is bad for you. And not just the idea that it's unhealthy, like in a gaining weight way. It's toxic for you, guys, whether it's seed oils or, I mean, we can go on forever. We've talked about all of this stuff. Everything in there, from the oils they use, from the French fries to the content from the bread, it is bad for you. It is hurting you. It is endocrine disrupting chemicals. It's got glyphosate. I mean, all of it, because it comes from the worst sources. It is cheap. It is unhealthy. It is made to last. And here he is literally picking this to promote. If you're going to make America healthy again, why wouldn't you pick any number of hundreds of thousands of large companies that are doing good stuff? Because it's not what they're really going to do. Like, let's just even put it this way. Let's say I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction. If this becomes a bigger focal point, which it seems to be, the argument that I expect would be that he's starting there because it is the worst. He's going to make it better. Well, that's an easy thing to say, isn't it? But we're talking about a $1 billion corporation that's not going to bow to Trump's interests because they want to be, bottom line, this is something that shouldn't exist if you're talking about making things healthier. Now, I'm not saying it in a way that we should force them to shut down. Free, do whatever you want. But I'm talking about as the person who is leaning in to make America healthy again, it should be, don't even engage with these platforms because they are the worst possible things you can put in your body. And that's adding a salad to the menu or changing one of the ingredients on one. It would take so much money to overhaul what they're doing, because the reason they're profitable is because they use these things. Now, I could go off forever, guys, but the point is, you just got to recognize that you're being played here. And where's RFK with this stuff? I mean, it's got to be pretty frustrating that he's just using his name to pretend all these things and then leaning in with McDonald's. This person says, oh, wait, who owns McDonald's again? Now, again, I wouldn't say owns McDonald's because it's not as simple as that. But guess what, guys? Vanguard and BlackRock. What do you know? What do you know? Look at that. They've got almost 109 million shares combined between the two of them. Seems to be the vast majority. Look at that. Does not matter? I guess only matters when it's people you don't like, right? We'll ignore the Rumble aspect, that Vanguard and BlackRock have the two leading shareholders, or I think it's either the top two or one of the top three or two of the top three in Rumble, but we don't care about that. But if Albemarle and the company involved with North Carolina, with the lithium and the hurricane have less shares, suddenly it's the most monumental point in the world. I argue they either both matter, they don't, neither of them matter. And I think they both matter. But here is interesting to me is that nobody really would point. If this was something connected even tangentially to Kamala Harris, it'd be the biggest story of the world. But of course, now we won't talk about it. It's being inconsistent. It's called hypocrisy. Here is another point. Oh, the irony. Yeah, even McDonald's and Israel. Yeah, they're one of those. This is one of the companies that dramatically benefits from working with Israeli companies that are using Palestinian land. But who cares, right? Because Maha. Now, Derek Bros made a good point. And this is kind of what we keep seeing. what we saw at the Bitcoin conference. Actually, I'll grab that article for you. It's a good article. We were actually at the Bitcoin conference and got to see him speak. And it was honestly, I mean, people were laughing at him, to be quite honest. I was in a huge room full of Bitcoiner people and they were pretty much making fun of him the whole time. But either way, it's about trying to co-opt this thing. And it's working for some of them. Peter Thiel, the whole overlap, the technocratic group that we're seeing build. This is one by Derek. I'll include for you to read. It's a good article. And it gets into that conference, but the bigger direction of it all. But this is a recent discussion on the 15th where Donald Trump is discussing the Fed. And as Derek writes, Trump says some basic SHIT about the Fed. And I mean, it's basic. It's the same thing he does in all these contexts. But again, because he says it, suddenly people lose their minds. Now, I get the interest in seeing somebody who has influence saying things that you're not used to people saying in a main stage like that. But it's about, about action. It's like Russ Albright. I hope that happens. Something tells me it won't, at least not the way we think it will, or there'll be some kind of excuse for why it can't happen now, and then it never does. The point is that if you're going to address this, we have to first acknowledge that he made a whole big thing about the Federal Reserve his last election, and nothing ever happened. So he just floats another statement saying the Fed, and the bigger point for me is he says something about the Fed that makes, they're bad, or the point is about how it's the easiest job and Powell just gets to do, work one day a year, making fun of him, right? But he doesn't answer the question. And that's why people like Jack Posobiec and the rest of it jump in and sort of frame it for you the way that you're supposed to read it, even though he doesn't even answer the question. That I'll get to that. It's a point about Iran where Jack does that. In this case, he doesn't answer it. The question is about whether or not he's going to work with Powell or not, and he ultimately skirts the question, but they love it because he said, bad guy Powell. How much you want to bet nothing changes? And then they're going to say he's the best because Trump picked him. Whatever they choose, they're going to claim that was the right choice because people are they're locked on to his star. That's how this works. Here's the clip.
Backwards and forwards about whether you want to keep Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. His term as chair runs on to May 2026. Would you seek to remove or demote him?
Look, I think it's...
Okay, so just so it's clear, the whole thing, would you get rid of him? Demote or get rid of him? That's the question.
The greatest job in government.
It depends on to May 2026. Remove or demote him?
Look, I think it's the greatest job in government. You show up to the office once a month and you say, let's see, flip a coin.
Yeah, which is funny. The guy, I think it's a ridiculous position in general. I think the whole thing is illegitimate, but he doesn't answer the question.
And everybody talks about you like you're a god. Oh, what will he do? I mean, before the guy used to walk into my office, he was like begging. Oh, he was fine.
But you did.
See, you know what? It's so. I don't know why more people who are confident people can't recognize what he's doing and how petty it is. That this guy is so full of himself. And I don't know why people who even like him can't acknowledge that. It's just hubris is off the charts, that he has to tear down somebody that he sees as so he goes to everyone think, oh, he treats him like a god. So he has to go, oh, yeah, he's terrible. And he's cutting him down to make himself feel bigger because he has to be the biggest one in the room. That's who he is. And you all know it. If you've read his books, understand what he said about himself before he became a politician, he's very clear about it. And if you read his books, then you'll know how he's playing you right now.
You talked about removing him once.
I did because he was keeping the rates too high.
Yeah.
And I was right.
And you would do that again.
In fact.
See. He didn't answer again. He skirts it again.
He actually dropped them too much when I did this. Because I said I was threatened.
So the point is that Trump asked, and he was so willing to comply that he dropped it more than I needed. Oh, Trump is so good.
And to terminate him, there was a question as to whether or not you could. And there was an article in the New York Times, 2 half pages. 1 page said I can do it by lawyers. 1 half page said I couldn't. And that was enough for him. And he dropped the hell out of the rates. He dropped them too much. He dropped them actually too much. Okay.
Still haven't answered the question, mind you. Still rambling on about something that nobody asked.
Here's the story. I think that if you're a very good president with good sense, you should be able to at least talk to him. I don't say make the decision at all, but I've been
closest he's gotten the entire time, suggesting the opposite, actually, that people are saying. That, he's a good president. You should be able to work with him. Right now, the presentation essentially, he went after the Fed. See, he's going to get rid of him. That's the conversation under this tweet. Maybe they didn't listen to the entire thing, because right there it seems to suggest that, you should be able to work with him. I'm going to bet you that that's what happens.
Very successful businessman. I've done really good, much better. Now people are understanding how good I've done because they're seeing it.
Oh, okay. So the question he didn't answer ends with him praising himself. Typical.
Much better than the fake news wants to give me credit for.
It's just fantastic. Now, of course, anybody that is a super Trump supporter is going to frame me as being somehow obsessed with Trump. The reality is they're all this bad. It's just the point is right now, this is clearly what's about to happen next. I could be wrong, but watch. I'm telling you guys, this is the selection. This is what's going on. And this is all my opinion. But I think it's just all of the indicators point in this direction. But if you want to try to compare, Kamala was ridiculous. Biden, Obama, Bush, they're all the same thing to me. So to me right now, this is the focal point of what they're going to put in front of you next. And that's why it's important to break down. And it's amazing that people fall for this stuff. But as Derek continues, it doesn't matter. He said, well, this is how he operates. All right, I'll just start over. I think I stopped at the beginning. He blows a huge opportunity to talk about ending the Fed, which he won't do, is the point, and exposing the financial scam that he says is a silly joke. This is how he operates. He throws a bone to different issues and crowds who follow them. He doesn't matter if he ever does anything about it. He made us laugh or he trolled them. He's exactly right. It's whatever ends up happening, they lean into it like it was always the plan. Because these people are the ones kind of corralling the actual conservatives that are actually objective, that might actually care about one way, but they get pulled into it because they're following the party, because that's what we're all told we're supposed to do. It says the bar has been set so low that people are willing to accept lip service and hopium. You're going to look like a fool for trusting him in all of them. Again, I agree. And here is, this is just hilarious to me that this every year, like of all events that seem to happen, this one always stands out to me as just cutting through the BS and showing you that they're all on the same team. The correspondence dinner where they all stand up and give jokes. And, remember even last time, Hillary Clinton was there, he was there, and they're laughing together. It's just so sad. You can see right through it. Now, also, the idea that we have some planned dinner where all of the supposed journalists who are supposed to be holding these people to account are all there hobnobbing and as he says, the dude yucking it up with Trump right next to him is Cardinal Dolan, a man who has been accused over the years of covering for priests who abuse children. Look it up. And of course, he denies it, but the evidence shows he, at the very least, encouraged them to take payoffs and leave rather than be investigated, which, by the way, if you're still a person out there denying the reality of the Catholic Church, the controversy that's going back forever, and that's as a Christian, I'm saying this, I understand, because it doesn't undermine my beliefs to point out that evil people have found their way in positions of power in the church, which is, by the way, what's been going on since the existence of the church. It doesn't make the church itself bad. Good. It's up for you to decide. My point in saying is that there are bad people in every position of power, whether it's religion or not. We're seeing it in Israel right now. But think about that. And of course, you can maybe just sit next to him. My point is about the larger conversation, right? The idea that these people are all hobnobbing next to each other and rubbing elbows, and they're all they're all on the same team is what this needs to show you. You can decide for yourself. Don't just trust me. Look into it. Now, here's what Jack Poso said. This is the kind of stuff that makes me almost like feel uncomfortable while I'm reading it. Like my honest opinion, as always, I don't think he believes this. I think this is him filling a role. Either way, there are people that feel like this, and it's like I feel like embarrassed for them. He says 500 years from now. And of course, you could also argue that he's kind of trolling or joking, but they always love to walk that line. Well, this is what they're really pushing. Well, it's a joke if they get called out for it, but really it says 500 years from now, they will never believe us that a figure such as Trump actually existed. That one individual would face imprisonment, survive multiple assassinations, and keep fighting for his country. It will seem impossible. They will think we made him up. You mean other than the fact that you could find like 45 people in history that have been in the exact circumstance? These people are so stupid. I don't understand why people listen to people like this that are so obviously compromised and so obviously manipulating. It kills me. This person says, no, they won't think we made him up. He'll still be alive and the ruler of all mankind. Now that is more of a joking position, but still the Trump worship or any politician worship is embarrassing. You should be embarrassed. Did the founding fathers tell us to worship a president? No, they told us to question all of them. In fact, I think it was Roosevelt that said it was servile to blindly support your president. In fact, he called it morally treasonable to the American people. Look it up. There's somebody doing a morally treasonable act according to our founding fathers, but who cares? Because he's the one. Well, I'll include this as well, this breakdown of all the different clips where Donald Trump is telling you that Israel should be able to control what you say, and our Congress for that matter. Here's the one where he says that he will be, once he's elected, he'll remove the Jew haters from the country. Right? By the way, and this is the whole point right here. This person says Jew hate is constitutional. Now, I kind of got the sense that was trying to, like that might be like an IDF troll trying to get something to be said the wrong way. So I said, okay, while deserving of ridicule and condemnation, yes, that's the truth. I said, but to frame it correctly, having an opinion, even unpopular or disgusting, is constitutionally protected. Or rather, the inherent God-given right is outlined by the Constitution, which is the right way to say that. Just wanted to include that because the reality is that they're screaming about one side's going to remove your free speech. Literally the guy who was violating your free speech on Twitter is telling you that she's going to end free speech, Elon Musk. The point is that obviously the worst of opinions are why free speech exists, or the idea of why it was outlined by the Constitution, the inherent right, because the worst of speech is what needs to be protected. Now, that's the problem for a lot of people. They don't want to do that. If you don't believe that, then you don't believe in free speech. And as I always say, then make a case for it. Let's have an argument about why limited speech, and that's where we're going right now. There's articles being written about why free speech was a failure. Flatly disagree. But my point is that the people out there on the right are the ones leaning into limited speech while pretending to fight for free speech. Not every conservative, but clearly at the top of this party line, we can see it. So that's what I want to highlight. Trump is literally telling you that we're going to, and even Elon Musk made points about this in regard to the conversation of anti-Semitism, that we need to get rid of them. Again, to stay as clear as possible. If there's somebody out there that just hates Jewish people for no reason and expresses that online or says it to people he knows, that's protected under the Constitution, or rather, again, it is outlined as an inherent right by the Constitution. And again, I will say you're disgusting. You're a terrible person for blindly hating people because of their religion without even knowing them. But it's protected under an inherent right in the Constitution. If you don't believe that, then you don't believe in free speech. Simple as that. And then, of course, the larger point is that what they call Jew hate is simply fighting for the independence of Palestinians. Right? Or pointing out that the Israeli government just killed people with a bomb. Oh, you're a racist. That's literally the definition of anti-Semitism in some groups right now. If you criticize Israel, period. It's not hyperbolic at all. That's the fact. How did we ever get there? How did anybody ever pretend that made sense? This is the lunacy we're dealing with. Here's Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur. David Jacobs, who is apparently a guy, he says, Francesca Albanese has asked me for evidence of her hate speech. Well, let's break it down. Guys, this is just embarrassing. He should be embarrassed. But either he has an agenda or he is this blinded by this agenda. So she responded, said, I'm waiting for the evidence of my hate speech, doctor. So first she responded to this thread, which I'll show you next, and says, the confusion regarding hate speech and evidence, the conflation of the two things in the patchwork of arguments presented is astounding. Her point is that you're basically saying, so when she presents evidence that, for example, the first one, that the Jewish lobby, which is what they would call it, which is what it is, that's what even Miriam Ottoson and Donald Trump calls it. When she says that they're the ones influencing X, Y, and Z, which is what they're literally on the record lobbying for, and he calls that racist, anti-Semitic, well, it's a fact. It is a verifiable fact, but you don't like that fact, so you call it anti-Semitism. And even now, these definitions would call it that. That doesn't change that it's a fact. So now you're turning definitions out that claim that facts are anti-Semitic. But she goes, the notion that scientific principles should take precedence over ideology extends beyond the realm of legal discipline. See you at the University of Toronto. I'm sure you have noted day and time of the event. I'll have to make sure we keep an eye out. You guys are watching. Don't let me miss that. If there's an event where they're going to be debating or something, I'd love to see that. So here's what he says. On October 27th, 2020, the government of Ontario adopted the Israel-focused definition of anti-Semitism, which means that you saying Zionism is a bad thing, or Zionist entities did X, Y, and Z is the same thing as Judaism. It's not. Plenty. I'm arguing it's getting. There is a hell of a lot more today, Jewish people in the world, that are calling out Zionism as not Judaism, as exactly the opposite of what they believe right now, all around the world. So you can't just pretend like half the Jewish population is just suddenly anti-Semitic because they don't believe in a political ideology. But that's what's starting to change the conversation. So all he's doing is pointing to a definition that says criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic and then going, well, she's doing that, so she's anti-Semitic. It's lazy and it's intellectually dishonest. But he goes on to say they define anti-Semitism as making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as collective, nothing she did, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or the Jews controlling the media. Okay. See, here's the point. If we're talking about a Zionist political organization that has influenced all sorts of things, that is not the same thing, which is why they're so desperate to conflate Judaism with Zionism so they can pretend you're being anti-Semitic. It's pretty simple. But he goes, in 2014, you posted the following. And see, he's so lazy about this that he doesn't even make the right point. She's not talking about controlling anything. She says, America and Europe, one of them subjugated by the Jewish lobby and the other by the sense of guilt about the Holocaust. Yeah, that makes people upset, but it's a truth. There are people all around the world that are calling these things out, Jewish organizations. And don't forget that Donald Trump himself, in front of a Zionist, what was it again? Oh, that's right. It was a Vance Trump rally. It's so crazy to me. Where Miriam Adelson was there presenting him. Half the flags behind him were Israeli, and they had all the Israeli lobby and all these different supporters there. And the point was that he addressed it as the Jewish lobby. Because it's not, even the Israeli government will talk about it. But if you point it out, suddenly you're a racist. That's exactly what it is. Now, here's what's hilarious to me is that they will make the effort to conflate the two things and say, well, they're the same thing. And then when you point it out, you're racist. Didn't you just tell me that they're the same thing, that Judaism is Zion? Okay, well, then why would it be the Jewish lobby? I mean, this is what desperation looks like. Your narratives are falling apart in front of you. You don't know what else to do but call people racist. And he goes, it also defines it as drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policies to that of Nazis, which, by the way, is the worst. I mean, anybody with a brain today is not going to pretend that you can't see every single parallel in existence around whatever we're told about what happened in World War II to what they're currently doing everywhere. It's like saying that there's murder taking place, therefore that's like a murderer, and saying it's racist because you're comparing it to something that it is. They're killing people. They are experimenting on people. They are using human shields. They are ethnic cleansing. I mean, every single element. And guys, these are not up for debate. These are represented by human rights groups. B'Tselem, for example, which is an Israeli human rights group. United Nations. Every group that you could possibly talk about other than their governments and politicians are pointing these things out. Now, I don't even need to go further. He does the same thing over and over and over. She will talk, debate, prove circles around this moron. I'm looking forward to it. Now, this person says, and we're back on the point about, still on Donald Trump and two-party illusion. She goes, and this is insurrection, Barbie. It says, that's why Trump is the only solution. To a meme that says, it's not, as you've seen us show in the past, white versus black, straight versus gay, rich versus poor, man versus woman. It's the state versus you. Okay. Now, think of the just like humorously stupid to point out that Trump is the option. Okay, so if there's only the state and you, which is what it says, so is Trump you or is Trump the state? Let's just be very careful. Think it through. Take a second, okay? There's only two options. You shared the meme, lady. There's the state and there's you. So if he's not you, follow me here, he's got to be the state, right? So what are you missing? The point is I'm trying to highlight here is that these people are sharing memes like the one about, you in this movie, you supported the resistance. This movie, you supported the resistance, but in the rural, you support the empire. Elon shares these things. And then while they're literally supporting the empire, I think this is almost trying to present what they want you to see them as while they're doing the opposite. So I simply responded, let me understand your logic here. You believe that voting in a presidential election for the chosen representative of the Republican Party is not voting for the state? We can't be this easy to manipulate, guys. I just can't be this simple. And then he responds saying, deep state, a real threat. So I think what he's trying to say is that it's the deep state that's the real threat. Well, okay, then. So you don't understand the meme then, right? Well, he didn't necessarily post it. The point being, though, is if you're going to say the deep state, well, then there would be three things in this meme. It'd be you, the state, and the deep state. I'm just trying to be specific, and that's my point is about the memes they share. They're trying to tap in to what the independent media has been doing, or the people that are challenging these ideas, right? Like the point exactly what Derek Bros made about the Bitcoin conversation. That is about it's about challenging the financial system, but Trump and them are going to make it the system. They're going to warp it in to make it the system. It's not how this was supposed to go. That's the whole point about this. Instead of fighting the state, you're leaning into it and acting like that's the solution. It's as simple as that, and it happens every time. I simply said, so they don't understand the meme at all. And he says, can you explain it? And this guy says, Trump is the deep state. And he goes, no way. It's hero worship, it's sad. Now, this one he deleted already, which is funny, but I said the same thing. Let me understand the logic. And it was something to the effect that, you don't understand anything, that he's the one and Trump's going to save us from the other. And I simply said, well, one of us is misunderstanding. That's for sure. I bet personally that it's the one who is hoping that billionaires and technocrats follow through with their promises. But that's just me. Think about that, guys. So I'm over here saying he's the problem, that the government's going to, whatever, to a meme that says state versus you. And they're saying, no, he's the one that's going to save us from that dynamic. And I'm like, there's only two things happening here. And one of them is trusting and hoping that billionaires and technocrats, follow through with their promises. How often has that worked out for us? Last one. Oh, same thing. Deep state is what you want to avoid. And that's why I respond. Well, so then you don't understand the meme, right? You can't say that and pretend that that's obviously contradictory. And somebody just sent me this. I just think this is crazy. Like, this is where the mindset has gotten. People like Health Ranger here, who has been pretty counter to mainstream narratives. It's almost like the Republican side of this that has framed themselves as like the anti-establishment side have like literally become the establishment. And that's my point. They always have been. That's the reality. The government, at least, have always been it. They're just one thing. But what's weird is that we've always, all of a sudden, these supposed independent media parts are just like, as it says, vote like your eternal soul depends on it. What a weird overlap. So vote like you are. Like, okay, well, that's something that usually is left to the mainstream discussion. Get out there and vote, guys. But then vote like your eternal soul depends on it. That's not by accident, guys. And that's weird to me. That's like, keep talking about this overlap of your religion with your journalism. That it's weird and it shouldn't be there. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to express what you think and who you believe in your religion. What I'm saying is when it comes to and not even this necessarily this post, but when it comes to your journalism and you're breaking down information, which we've seen from Jones and plenty of them, where suddenly it becomes some kind of God this and God while you're reporting the story. And that influences how you frame it. Well, now you're talking about facts overlapping with something that's faith-based. Obviously, somebody objective can see why those things shouldn't be in the same conversation. I'm saying this as a Christian, you understand? That's my point. But lastly, on the point of the two-party illusion of Donald Trump, before we get into Twitter in particular, this is pretty crazy to me. Every day, it says, from now through November 5th, Elon Musk says his America PAC, America Inc., I think is what it is, or just America, will be giving away $1 million to someone in swing states who signed our petition to support free speech, even though you're not supporting free speech. How funny is that? And the right to bear arms, which I don't even know why. Think about how weird it is to make. What do you sign a petition for? Those are constitutional rights. He's trying to give the impression that if you don't sign this and lean in with them, that then it's all gone. That's not even possible. That's not possible. They cannot honor your rights, but they are inherent. They're God-given. That's the whole point. They are trying to warp the way you see things, just like the Twitter files and everything else that's happening. On top of that, you're literally bribing people to engage with the political dynamic that you want. Isn't this, imagine if this was the other way around. They were just making a case that through illegal immigration that they were buying votes. And you could make a fair argument for that, but you're literally buying them. And I already made this point before. He says, we want to make sure that everyone in swing states hears about this. And then so he's trying to lie to you. He is playing you like a fool. Or he really is that uninformed. Maybe both. Patrick Henningsen says, but Elon Your recent campaigning on Twitter shows that you are extremely anti-First Amendment, which, by the way, we should all be able to see if you're not blinded by partisan politics. He says, care to explain? And he's posting this from the 20th. And it says, so Elon Musk just announced a $1 million lottery prize, aka soft bribe, for you to sign his new First Amendment petition to sign his loyalty to First Amendment. However, back in May, Elon publicly called for, poll posted below, all Americans, students, etc., to be deported for taking down the U.S. flag, which, by the way, is a Supreme Court is roundly, these are protected acts, and flying another country's flag, which you have every right to do. I mean, how do you not? So you could argue that he suddenly changed his mind, but you can see these things still happening. They're still censoring on Twitter. But my point is that Donald Trump is talking about removing the Jew haters, and he's literally talking about these people don't believe in free speech. They want you to believe that their limited version, if that's even what they actually believe in, is somehow the full picture and everything else makes sense. They're playing you. I'm trying to reach the conservatives that might be open to this, and the team sport politics, they don't care. He says, pretty obvious he was referring to students protesting, hoisting a Palestinian flag. Yeah, obviously, they've been pointing to them. He says some of his followers agree with this anti-First Amendment proposed law. Quick lesson for the constitutionally illiterate. Even burning our flag is protected. It is. Texas v. Johnson, 1989. He says, sorry to his many fans for pointing his hypocrisy out. I do really appreciate Elon's past efforts to make Twitter a more inclusive space. I don't. I think it's all a scam. I think it's obviously not the reality of what's going on. He says, but it's a legitimate concern for someone who many would agree with has bought their way into power. But as Elon sometimes claims to profess, the First Amendment is for speech you don't like, not just for political fair weather. See, they love to say the thing that they know you think, but they don't do it. And that's what exactly what Derek was just saying. They float this middle of the ground idea and they let you believe into whatever side you want. Nothing ever actually happens, or worse, they completely undermine it, or censor people. They remove your First Amendment. It says, again, no, respect it. Again, the right way to say that. It's always important to make sure, because it becomes like somehow that they gave you these things if you don't frame it right. It says, many would agree that feigning constitutional values is akin to phony patriotism. Or you could even say like a stolen valor kind of a conversation. His hypocrisy on this, this could indicate some deeply held fascist or other beliefs, or just a political opportunist. Both. He says, so Elon, have you changed your position on this? I don't believe. I think he put the wrong tweet at the bottom there. No. Oh, this one first, actually. So this is the secondary part of this. Remember, so now that's $1 million that's going to, I guess, randomly go to some people. I wonder if it even happens. Wouldn't that be interesting if just nobody gets it? It gets floated, but nobody gets it. But so $1 million going to somebody every month, or I forget what time frame he said, based on whether you do this and, trust that they're going to do it and not just give it to who they want. Award this company. But the point is that on top of that, they were doing, was it $75 or some kind of an offer for anybody that brought in somebody else to sign the petition? So my point was obvious. Are you really going to just be real? They're not going to bring in a Democrat, guys. That's not going to happen. So they're going to bring in Republicans. So what he's effectively doing is bribing people to get people to vote. That's buying votes, what it is. And he says Elon Musk raises payment now to $100 for voters who signed the petition supporting free speech, right? Now, on top of that, it wasn't just this. Remember, the first part of it was bringing them into the swing states. That was the first offer. So he's throwing money at all of this stuff. It's very manipulative. Now, this specifically is not about the votes. It was about the swing state conversation. And that's still there. If you bring somebody in and have them sign up to vote in these locations, ultimately you get money from Elon Musk. Again, assuming that it works out. Sarah Emerson also points out he's quietly created 2 new entities this month. This was October. One called United States of America, Inc., which names him as the sole director. This follows his $75 million America PAC donations. That's what we're just pointing at. Dark money reports and the Government Efficiency Commission. Right. So, he is now essentially part of the government as a contractor, but he's going to be part of the government. And that's going to change. In my opinion, it's going to just show you what's already been happening, but it's going to legally on the surface change a lot. I argue nothing will actually change. They'll still act the same way they do. And I think that's the point. But I find that to be interesting, the way this is all going. The problem is they built this interesting narrative around this to where if you call him out or Trump, that you suddenly are just because you hate Republicans or you're obsessed with Trump. Well, I'm sure some of that exists, just like you're just as obsessed with him in the other way. But a lot of people are just being objective and calling out that there's an issue here. Like apolitically pointing out that what he's doing around Venezuela, for example, or any number of things are alarming. And it deserves to be called out. But people, it's again, one side of it's over like jumping at every shadow around him, and the other side is ignoring all of them. It's how this system works. So talking about Twitter in general. First of all, I just want to point out a couple of things I thought were interesting, some of these differences. They're now, I guess, going to stop blocking from, like, they can still see your content, but they can't engage with it, which I really don't care. To me, it's more so about stopping the constant trolling and shilling of the people that you know are doing that for obvious. So as long as they're not commenting, it doesn't bother me. But the point, and again, anyone that's doing this, what we're doing, and you know, that for as long as we have, you're going to get people that will like obnoxiously constantly do. And it like, for example, the person that's pretending to be me. So this gets into the idea of censorship versus your First Amendment, which is people always conflate. They don't understand government. My point is that if people are out there and acting in bad faith and constantly I will block them. I don't care about that. It's not about blocking someone the conversation. It's about somebody who's trying to manipulate the conversation. And obviously it's my platform. So I don't want you to be, but now he's going to allow people to see it, which we'll see how it plays out. But this person made a good point. And at the exact time, Twitter is further eroding Western textual norms and values of rights to personal privacy. Because remember, Elon was the one leaning into the whole removing being anonymous in the platform. The digital ID push is coming. I think it's all connected. This makes a good point. Slow incremental changes, boiling frog. And he says, and I don't know if this is a real quote or not, but they say secrets and closed doors and non-disclosure rights for me, full-blown exposure of your entire lives to the global brain blockchain for all of thee. I think they're just kind of making a, cheeky point about it. But so now, whether you block someone or not, the content's viewable to everybody. I actually think that's probably a better way for content-wise, but it's interesting the point they're making. Maybe it's overthinking it, but I do think this is where we're going. Here, another one was interesting. This is totally separate, but this one I found kind of odd. Very, sort of like Elon buying votes. Here you go. You can buy replies. Why would you allow that? Doesn't that seem to sort of undermine at least the pretend nature of what this is supposed to be, where it's honest engagement? It says, boost your replies with premium. Watch the conversation flow. So essentially, you can just drive your replies into the conversation. That seems pretty dumb to me. That's breaking the platform for your benefit. Or another way to control it, I would argue. But here's some things I wanted to point out from Twitter that I think, and this overlaps with the foreign policy conversation. I pointed this out around the recent horrifying, what we just saw with the tents and the people burning alive while in hospital beds in Gaza. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And I pointed this out when I was trying to share this in Robert's article. I said, hey, Elon, why is it that every single post, and I found at least 4 of them, that I can find that highlights the fact that Israel just burned people alive in hospital beds, refuses to allow me to embed them? And it could just be me. I think that might be part of this. Must be one of those coincidences. Now, I'll show it to you right now. So I was trying to grab Loki's tweet, for example, and I was trying to embed it. Oops. Embed. And I go to it, and it says, oh, not found. Weird. Every one of them. I mean, literally everything that I was the only one I was able to get work was somebody who this right here, Furkan grabbed this and said, here, that's just the right one. But he basically grabbed the thing, quoted it, put it out there. And I think it was just because it hadn't been seen yet. So I embedded it, put it up. My point is that every single one of them down here you can look at. Every one of them. I tried this and it didn't work. So is that just me? See my point, guys? That's not just an accident. Okay, I called it out. No one's doing it. So there's something strange. So if there is somebody over here who said that he was able to get this one work, not saying anything fishy isn't happening, but this one worked for him, he said, which I don't know whether it did or not, but my point is that he said he tried it and worked. So am I being stopped from doing that? Or is it just a glitch? You guys can decide for yourselves. You know my opinion. I think there's something much more manipulative going on with this platform right now, more than we've ever seen before. And I think it's obvious that this is Israel's influence on this is undeniable. From the authentics verification that is still there. Nobody it's nobody than me seems to be pointing this out. Not even the censored man who got this all the attention. Maybe he hasn't seen it. Maybe that because of this, he's not even seeing what I'm saying. But I think ultimately it is a big deal. It is a Unit 8200 intelligence entity that works with Israeli intelligence that is literally taking your biometric data that Twitter doesn't even need right now, at the very least, and holding it and using it just to identify you and anonymize. That's crazy. And Elon pretended that wasn't going to happen anymore. He literally said, okay, we're going to use Stripe instead, and then didn't do that. They do use Stripe in other parts, but they still use an Israeli company, an intelligence entity, to verify you for authenticity. That's wild. And CHEQ is the company they use to stop the bots that literally is using Israeli bots. And this has been proven by, I think, CensorMan and others. That's why they removed the showing of the likes, because it was highlighting how these things were being used. And he called it out. And then suddenly they removed it. We're being gamed. I think it's obvious. So this person, after I posted this about them burning intents and they wouldn't let me share it, says, F around and find out. Typical. Probably an IDF bot for all we know. But I said, so in one post, demonstrating how you are both okay with genocide and censorship. Sure glad you guys aren't falling for anything. Two-party illusion. So again, he said this worked for him. Now, I want to play this for you real quick. This is really strange to me. Now, this is what I'm dealing with. Now, this is the kind of stuff that I don't really show you often, but since we're kind of getting into it, I wanted to show you this. I found this. This is me with Twitter every day. And I'm talking every day since I shouldn't say the moment he took over, but this is what I'm dealing with every single day. I bring up tweets and they'll sit in the browser for an hour. And all of a sudden, this is what's going on. And I'm telling you guys, that's every single day. Where I'm trying to go through, I'm just going to mute this because there's background noise, where my tweets just all of a sudden don't load. And I have to go through and hit reload on every single one, but not just once. Look, I have to click it like 45 times in a row, like rapid click. You can kind of hear it, I think. Look at that. You know how irritating that is? I go through it for you. I was there. And look how long that takes. And these are tweets that I just had pulled up. So I have to go through and hit every single one, every single time. I mean, and if this was one time, now here's the way I should put this, guys. And it goes on for forever. I go through like every single tweet. And look. Oh, it's not showing it. Every single one on both those browsers. You realize how stupid that is? So there's only two things in my mind. Either this is just how bad Twitter is, which is pretty crazy, and we should ridicule and call out that Twitter is that bad today, that it just doesn't work properly. But I don't think that's the case. You tell me, are you seeing this anywhere? I'm genuinely of the mind that this is being applied. Now, look, we already showed you this. We already showed you. Where is it? This one. We already showed you what APAC Tracker revealed before they removed this from being seen. TLAV had 60 different tags applied to the Twitter account that were all suppressing the flow, and yet we still somehow get some reach. Think about how crazy that is. Random things, abusive, whatever these things mean, compromise, all these things are used to suppress the reach of our content. TLAV, more than anybody in this entire conversation had shown. There was a loop, like some kind of glitch where Grok was being asked, it would demonstrate the different tags you had, and then all of a sudden Grok went down and it came back up, and this wasn't being able to be done anymore. Every time we can see how transparently they are gaming us. So my point is that this is what's happening to me and plenty of others, in my opinion. And that's why this kind of thing happens, where you just cannot, it's about suppression. It's about slowing you down. It's about diminishing your efforts. In some cases, just stopping your spread and stopping you from being able to access it. Sometimes it doesn't even work for me. I found that to be relevant and interesting that this is even happening still. So here is another one that I found really interesting. So I was going to show you this the other day, and since I had it pulled up, this has already shifted. So now it says visibility limited. I always found that fascinating. So you claim it violates or may violate hateful conduct, but you allow it to stay there? That's interesting, right? But yet when something happens to me, when they are even wrong in the past, or YouTube, or whatever else, where they medical misinformation when it's not even about medical information, the point is it's overly applied. But check this out. It says, Aiden Hunter says, this is how Jews talk about us amongst themselves. Now, I'm not framing this as Jewish people. In my opinion, it's obviously, as I've said every time, in this context, it would be Jewish people that are influenced by Zionism. But realize it's not just Jewish people. There's people that are Christian who clearly are influenced by Zionism in the same way, arguably more in the world today than Jews. So the point isn't about Zionism. That's the reality. You can argue, you can make up everything you want around that. To frame that I'm somehow attacking Jewish people is simply not the case. I'm going after the Zionist influence over anybody, and that includes Jews. But his point is simply that, and he's not wrong, this is what they're saying, which is crazy that you should look at. But I want to be clear that I think that's the Zionism that is causing that. I know plenty of Jewish people that would call this out, guys. So I don't care if you think that's 0.5% or 50%. It matters to highlight it the right way. And it says, they debate how we should be slaughtered. They think all Palestinians should be killed, babies and all. He's right. It's easy to see. It's everywhere on this platform. It says, and this is just what we see online. And the privacy of their homes is far worse. Now, check this out, guys. You can go through and do every single one. But this is one of the ones I grabbed. This is crazy. So they suppressed this tweet. They suppressed the view of this tweet for showing what they're saying. Okay? This one from this guy right here. And again, you can look them all up. There it is. That's not suppressed. That's strange. Not suppressed at all. You know why? Because it doesn't have much reach. But it's not an equal application. And I'm not calling for any censorship. What I'm saying is this says orphans, future terrorists, all of them should be killed. That's what this guy says in response to a conversation about children and orphans being killed inside of these schools. So Twitter, in its infinite knowledge and insight, decides to limit the ability of this tweet highlighting that in a way that shows you how all-encompassing this is, but allows the tweet that calls for children to be murdered, orphans to be killed. And that one's okay. Do I need to explain that? Is it not obvious that they want this to be not viewed because it shows you the real picture, but they're okay with the hatred? They're okay with the calling for children to be killed? How do you misunderstand that? This is a compilation of information that shows you how disgustingly hate-filled Zionists are in this context. And they don't want that to be shared. That's the same reason I show you the doctor's tweet that I share is limited visibility every single time. Not because it violates any of the rules, I can prove it to you, but because they don't want the reach to get out, because it's powerful. And again, they, in this case, being Twitter. Now here, I thought another one. Anyway, there you go, take your time if you want to. I've already shown you in the past how to do the search, right? The advanced search. Type in the words. Actually, these are a little more difficult because you have to, what I do is I use Google Translate, type in the words, and then type in the Hebrew because they're all in Hebrew. That's why people aren't seeing this as much. And then you can find it using their tag. And that I just showed it to you right there. Right. So you type in their tag right here. And then, you wouldn't have this to grab it from. But so you have to type out the words and copy it over. You'll find every one of them. They're all there. None of them, not a single one that I found is visible, limited visibility. I think that is a powerful point, personally. Just show, and I mean, look at this, guys. I didn't even show you. Look how many he's showing you. Every single one of them screaming for children to be killed, laughing about people being hurt, raped, tortured. It is despicable. And to be clear, not what every Israeli or every Jew thinks. It's just simply not. Now, on top of that, another couple points are overlapping with this I thought were interesting, as Casey Wright points out. Maduro, speaking about this, he had this weird beef with Elon Musk, right? Well, he says, and he calls him, we'll coup whoever we want, because that's what Elon actually said about Bolivia. He says Elon personally bankrolled the effort to oust him for $1 billion, which, by the way, seems to line up with the way he was acting. But that's what Maduro says, so you have to, who knows if it's true. He's a member of the government, and governments lie. But the bottom line is that Elon, I think it was Alan McLeod pointed this out, didn't even mention Venezuela before 2023 or whatever it was. Not a word. And then all of a sudden was just gung-ho about overthrowing Venezuela. It's kind of easy to see. I genuinely think that's the reality. And Venezuela does have gigantic lithium reserves. Some of them are not even developed. But he also points this out. He says, so it turns out the Venezuelan gang that everyone says has taken over Colorado, Maduro says that gang is led by the same guy who led the charge that were trying to oust him. Think about that. So here we have a guy who's being used to try to oust Maduro, apparently funded by Elon Musk, if you take Maduro at his word, which you should question. And now, by his word again, the guy who was being led that way is now suddenly in the United States. Now, shouldn't we maybe ask, seeing as how Elon has also been pushing this argument from Colorado? No, let's just say for sake of conversation that this is true. Well, wouldn't that seem to suggest that he's responsible partly for what's going on in Colorado? The evidence isn't there, but I found it fascinating. Now, this could just be Maduro kind of trying to get him back for their little back and forth dynamic. But it's interesting. And I do, let's not forget that the Venezuelan resistance, these people were horrible. They were funding the worst people, just like every other situation. They were the ones that were beating people up, and they were the ones that were they're throwing Molotov cocktails on the trucks and blaming it on the other side. Every time in every dynamic, you can see the people that they support or they use, and they're the worst because the worst are usually more amenable to here's money, do what I tell you. Well, either way, he says the CIA hired them to oust Maduro. They failed, and now they're here in the United States committing crimes. What I find interesting about that, and here's the actual article, by the way. It's in Spanish, just translated. And it's what he highlights. Here's a little bit of TikTok. By the way, with no source material, just an image and text, because, Twitter files. I did see this thread, and I should have just saved it, but my opinion was this was one of few images that were posted by some building management company that clearly had an interest in not highlighting the problem. Doesn't mean they were lying, but it's hard to take at face value a person who has every reason to not want that story to be told, who came out and made this big story about how they were, basically leaning into the story that the Republicans are pushing around this conversation. Now, obviously, there's a gang issue here, and obviously there are Venezuelan gangs. It's the question of whether the full story they're pushing is the reality. For how many times they're lying and all the information, even within the story, they've been caught making up, it's kind of easy to at least recognize that there's lies and that the bigger story is, rather, the story is being used for partisan narratives. My point here is that if that's the point, if what Maduro just said is true, here's libs of TikTok highlighting a person who got beat up because of gangs that Elon Musk is funding, at least was in regard to Maduro, and now are back in Colorado. Like, isn't it weird, though, that they were going to scream about, I don't know, any other dynamic of illegal immigrants, of these problems, or the pointing at them and blaming Kamala Harris? I just find it almost entertaining to see how that overlap might make sense. And quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me. Let me do this real quickly. I forgot about this. You just got Twitter filed. Oh, there it is. Parks and Rec. I think that's funny. But so my point being simply that, obviously there's more always going on behind the scenes. Always. And it's obvious to see that Elon Musk he's acting in his own interests. So when you see him get aggressively involved, he's not fighting for free speech. He's not trying to save the country, guys. He's fighting for himself. Now, I could be wrong, but look at our track record. I think it speaks for itself. I think the evidence is pretty damn obvious what's going on. Trump is the same conversation. So we just talked about Elon's Great Reset. We rolled out every single thing that the conservatives, the Republicans were screaming about, rightly so, during the COVID-19 conversation, the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum. But Elon rolls out the same things, and we go, yay, because he's the good guy. We can't be that easy to manipulate. But here's the article. We covered it in. It's a lot. Here's what Alex Finn had to say on the 18th. He says Elon's $44 billion purchase of Twitter is the single greatest investment in human history. It's just so silly. I mean, it's right out of Trump's hyperbolic wheelhouse. Anyone who thinks otherwise is totally delusional, right? Let me make a wildly bombastic statement and then go, if you disagree, you're crazy. Just good start, right? But he goes on. The point in this one is to show you that he's just blind. Elon's the greatest. Everything's Elon. He didn't just buy a network. He bought power and exposure, and he's changing the world. That's what it's all about. You see down here, the people who thought this was a bad investment are playing checkers while Elon's playing 4D interdimensional chess. Oh, we're back there now. We're back at 4D chess again. I guess they just can't think of new things to say. Well, here's the point that actually I wanted to highlight. On the 15th, he says, I'm being 100% serious. Your only goal in the next 3 years is not to die. We are about to enter the greatest age in human history. Now he calls himself Steve Jobs mixed with Steve Austin, building the first one-person billion-dollar company. Who knows if he's even, I don't know anything about him, but that could just be all Twitter nonsense. But my point is to know why he would even know this, but you can think for yourself. But he goes, it's simply that it's being stated. And I believe it's a pro-Elon Musk, pro-Republican mindset, despite what we just came through. It says, we are about to enter the greatest age in human history. AGI, going to Mars, reversing aging. You see where this is going? If this was Elon, if this was Kamala, if this was Biden, if this was any Democrat, if this was Klaus Schwab, you already know the answer to that. You can finish that sentence yourself. Reversing aging, humanoid robots, self-driving cars. We are about to enter the first golden age of our lifetimes. We are about to achieve endless abundance, all in the next 3 years. So now you've got the Republican climate change, right? You know, we're going to die in 3 years. No, we're going to save the world in 3 years. Like, it's the same damn thing from different sides. It's always the way this works. He goes, I'm not kidding. De-risk everything in your life. So basically his point is if you just last it out, you're going to live forever. Well, isn't that sort of like a trust the plan in another way? Quietly box yourself up in your house and don't do anything for just let it all play out? Yes. I don't know why we can't see that. It says no more hard drugs, no more skydiving, no more speeding. There's a decent chance in the next 3 years we figure out how to reverse aging and nobody dies anymore, which I'm not even saying is necessarily like that crazy. Because I mean, I won't go into it now, but there's some damn terrifying stuff that there's some real conversations in this. And I think that my point would be, let me finish it real quick. It might sound crazy and illogical, he says, but this is the worst time in history for you to die. Stay inside, order all your groceries, learn to use AI, build products, lock the F in. Right. So lock down, use AI, order your groceries and Amazon. Okay. So COVID-19 again? Yay, Republicans and Elon. And it says, we are about to make it. So he says, oh, it's about the aging point. So, I mean, the reality being, there's obvious technology that is leaning in this direction, but it's just like everything else we talk about. Are we really going to pretend there's going to discover how to reverse aging and be like, here you go, free for everyone? Are we really that naive? I mean, even if you go back 150 or 50 years or 100 years, the point is that even then, when it kind of was the way things worked to a degree, where they would roll out new products, but even then, you look back and realize, okay, well, they had this on the burner for 50 years for the military. It's never how this works for average people. And that's just inventions that better your life. If we're talking about something like this, that turns you into like a different species, or you could frame it however you want. You are now separate. Because if you live forever, clearly people that die, you're lesser than. This will, I mean, people have made this point about genetic engineering. That essentially you're going to get to a point, which already happens right now, where you can go, oh, I want my baby to have blue eyes. I want them to be strong and fast and have blonde hair or whatever, right? I want them to be black and I want them to run fast. Whatever you want, people are going to choose what they want from their child. And now here's the question. For those that can't afford that, because you know that's how it's going to work, what happens to them in 50 years, 100 years, 500 years? You literally become a different species. That's not even up for question. You will eventually become something that is like time machine, like what is it? The Morlocks and you're going to be different things because you will change so dramatically. At the very least, you will be seen as lesser than. Now, to some people, they probably just shrug this off as crazy. But guys, it's literally this is going on to some degree. And if we're talking about the idea of never dying anymore, hoping, honestly, the second part of this is whether that's from a religious perspective, it's pretty blasphemous, right? That is blasphemy. You are actually, that's what people in the comments are like, that's anti-religion, anti-God. But this is the interesting part about this is you're having people that are driving from a Christian right mindset who are leaning into this. That's what Elon is all about. I just don't know why people in the conservative side of this who are open-minded enough to think about this can push back on this stuff. Call them out because they're not being honest with you. When he goes, people in the reply saying they don't want to live forever. Okay, boomer. God, that's so stupid. All these dumb little cheeky, so based and okay, boomer. I mean, I'm just like, maybe I'm just the old guy now, but I think those are stupid. I think they're just dumb statements. But this guy goes, a lot of people calling me anti-God because I want to live forever. You ever go to the doctor, take medicine? What an absolute, okay, that's a terrible argument. To not die is literally anti-God. That's exactly what that means. But you can decide for yourself. Maybe you're not religious out there. I just think this is driving us in the direction that everybody would freak out about if it was anybody else. And that point is, this is not Elon saying this, but this is the direction of this technocratic circle. There's no question there. You want to listen to Peter Thiel talk about this stuff? Guys, they're all leaning into this. The Ambrosia Company is literally taking blood of younger people and infusing it with an older person's blood to make them live longer. These things are already happening. That goes back a decade. So who knows where we are right now? Now, let's get into foreign policy, because I think this is important, because right now, I mean, whether this is something as Vanessa Beeley highlighted as sort of the almost like the justification to map out how this stuff gets used, there are so many overlaps what's going on. But my personal opinion is this should matter regardless, because what's going on here in most of these cases is being funded with your tax dollars if you're in the United States, or really in the West. And that should matter, because human life should matter to all of us. But let's start with the ISIS conversation. Now, this one really, I've talked about before, I think twice, and in depth. And I'll include those articles for you to read. So this starts with the Guardian, technically, and it says, "You are next. Online posts show Islamic State interest in attacks on the U.S. ahead of election." Now, I don't know if it's just me sort of looking at corporate media or politicians and just going I mean, it's like a cartoon. It's like they have gotten so used to how they can't even recognize how out of touch they are with what actually makes sense anymore. You're next. They literally apparently put a poster out, a propaganda poster that's like, "You're next. We're coming for you at the Capitol." I mean, why would that even make sense? If the objective is to do this, why would you tell them you're going to do it? Because that's what happens when they want you to think it's going to happen. When they either want you to think it or they want you to know who you're to blame when they do it. I mean, really think about how stupid this is. As stupid as pretending that Iran warned about attacking you, but then somehow failed. They literally told you so you could have, and even then you weren't able to stop most of it. The point is that this is standout on its face. I mean, on top of the fact that we know what ISIS and Al-Qaeda are, ridiculous. Because these are elements that are literally influenced, if not controlled, by the people we're talking about. That's why I've included the documentary yet again. Oh, it's this. It's right here. James Corbett's The Secret History of Al-Qaeda. I'm telling you, if you watch this, you will not be able to question this information. It's airtight. But here's the article from today. After the FBI arrested an Afghan man in Oklahoma planning an election day shooting on behalf of the Islamic State, because, they just hate your freedom, right? The terrorist organization re-entered what has become one of the most chaotic news cycles leading up to the November vote. Yeah, as I framed the title, pretty much the most opportune time to be like, oh no, they're going to attack you because they hate your freedom, despite the fact that it doesn't make sense with anything else that's going on. It says, warnings about Islamic State sponsored or inspired attacks in the West have intensified, which means nothing. It's like they said October 7th. Well, it's a day that things could happen, so be fearful. Inspired attacks means there's no evidence, but they think they might do it just because. And really, the framing is that our elections are the envy of the world, which is a ridiculous joke. Nobody thinks that, other than people in the political sphere and blinded two-party paradigm believers that don't know that nobody thinks that. It says, in a statement in the Tawhidi case, a U.S. Attorney General, that's the guy's name up here, Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi. In a statement on the case, the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, remarked there was a continuing need to, quote, combat the ongoing threat that IS and its supporters pose to American national security. You mean the group that Trump defeated 4 times? Right? And that actually gets into this article. They mention this point. They don't mention Trump, but there's a reason. Trump said repeatedly over his administration, they're 100% defeated. He said that over and over. So it's kind of silly. So either he lied, which it could be both, or they did, or it never existed, whatever you want to frame it as. It's silly to make these arguments. My point is that combat the ongoing threat to our national security. I mean, if this, first of all, is a group that we can prove is completely interlinked with our governments, well, then we should be very aghast by that. That means your government is literally planning something, or it's a group that's gotten out of control and they're responsible for that case. But either way, what we keep seeing with how this is, let's say, working inside of Yemen, Still to this very day, this big pocket of ISIS just seems comfortably snug right in the controlled U.S. and Saudi Arabia area that's only grown. My point is that they're locked in it. And yet somehow are able to, they're working with each other. You can see it right on the information. Or that they've moved them around and given them medical treatment. Or Israel, I mean, I'll get into all this in a second. The point is clear that this doesn't make sense. Or ISIS attacks Iran, let's say. Aren't they supposed to be the leading state sponsor of terrorism, but yet they're being attacked by the leading terrorist organization? Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But it says, describing how his agency has, quote, one hell of a job managing the threat of the resurgent terrorist organization. Oh, okay, simple as that. They're just coming back up again. Okay. Well, that doesn't make much sense when you understand the dynamic of what's really going on. I mean, are they, from where? The only way you can connect the dots is to recognize the people that the U.S. government, Israel, have been funding. It's obvious. Today, it's on the record. It's all been exposed. They've been funding the most radical elements of Islam for a very long time. Saudi Arabia has admitted this more than once. And that's where this ideology comes, the whole Wahhabi sort of Sunni mindset, which is driving the most radical elements. And that's largely why they're going after this whole religious divide, the Shiite-Sunni divide. This is a religious war in that context, and they're stoking that. Anyway, go forward. It goes on to say, despite the talk of top officials, public perception still remains that ISIS was defeated or else someone disappeared. Well, gee, maybe that's because the president said that 5 times. I wonder. But it says increasingly been discussing attacks on the West and the U.S. homeland. Because, of course, it makes perfect sense for them to go, we're going to bomb you. You ready? Oh, get ready. Here we come. And it goes on to say the online conversations are being led by Islamic State K or ISIS K, which is important. We're going to get into it next, which is a proxy element. Today is the proxy element of Israel and the United States, in my opinion, based on the evidence. The branch based in Afghanistan that was behind the Moscow attack, which again, that's where we did a deep dive because of that attack. That killed 145 people. I'm of the mind after this story today, I was thinking about this today, how many times we've talked about Afghanistan? And what do I say every time? That's the lie that we somehow just left Afghanistan. You can easily prove that there are elements still there, that there are contractors that still exist there, Academy, Blackwater type elements. And on top of that they still have overlap with the Taliban and different groups that they clearly have worked with despite the narratives. So my point is, I'm beginning to think that that's what this was all about. At least maybe the saving grace, because who knows how, the 20 plus Vietnam style failure, what do you want to look at it as, after they took minerals and lithium and everything else, opium. The point though, is that now, because we're after the fact, I believe that you're going to see a resurgent, as they're highlighting it, the ISIS threat in Afghanistan, which will justify that they have to go back in there, which they never really left. Even though I think what we're showing is that they are part of their element. They are another moderate rebels dynamic, but it just recreates this whole war on terror dynamic. And so the growing ISIS-K becomes the bigger problem because that's what I'm reading from this. My opinion, mostly based on the facts, but whether that is where it resurgent is the resurgent spot or not, that's for you to decide. That's what I think that's what logically lines up here. Now, going forward, it says, where was I? ISIS K or ISK in this article, Islamic State versus ISIS, says has quickly become the most active international force of the terror group, having already carried out the deadly plot in Russia, another in Iran. Okay, let's reflect on that. So we're talking about a group that they claim hates our freedom, right? Hates our freedom. Okay, but then you keep telling us that Russia and Iran are terrorists or just despotic places. So why are they attacking them? Okay, and then the idea is that they're going after you because they hate the West and Israel because they just hate the Jews, right? Isn't that, they keep telling us this. And Iran is sponsoring it all. Okay, but they attacked Russia and Iran, the people that you're fighting in this dynamic. I mean, it really is this blatantly obvious, especially since beyond all of that, we can simply walk this back to where it started, which is the U.S. and Israel. Now, my point is that we're now seeing this most active international force out of the place that they were occupying for 20 plus years and that they grew, that they are creating, and is attacking their enemies. Pretty easy to see. And now ISIS-K has recently, quote, reiterated its intent to target the U.S. with a poster depicting its militants holding a grenade in front of the U.S. Capitol, captioned, "You're next." Again, guys, it's as if it's what they would see in they're like making a movie. I think these people are so out of touch with what we think and how we read situations that they're making movies. Like their propaganda is like 1990s movie style stuff. It's ridiculous. Can't they think, or they just think we're that stupid. They're going to go, "We're coming for you." I mean, I guess you could argue that they did that to sow discord and they're not going to go after the Capitol. I mean, but guys, again, all those points together show you that this is, and we'll go through it. I'm going to give you the other parts of this that will connect with what I've been saying. To me, that's cartoonishly stupid. And it says, The Guardian obtained the same poster, which was released online through known ISIS-K platform. Okay, let's think about that. So we're in a technological age, right? To where they can track people down within minutes using technology. And we're going to pretend that they don't know where to find these people who have a platform? Are they that technologically advanced? They can stay one step ahead of the CIA or the Mossad? Really? I mean, I've made this point so many times over the years, that they have their terrorist platform, they post their terrorist content, whatever it is. Are we really going to pretend that they can't find out where that is? I mean, you could argue that they are technologically advanced, but that's not the way that they would want you to view them. I just find it to be silly. And it says, this is additionally concerning, quote, given the branch's mass casualty attacks on Russia and Iran. Here's how they frame this: leaving the United States as the remaining adversary. Hold on. So now you're claiming that they're an adversary of Russia and Iran, even though you keep telling us that they're the terrorist funders? You can't just keep playing it every direction whenever you want to, which is what they do. And it goes on to say, when ISIS-K has seized on the tumult in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over, you mean since the group that never actually stopped being there, that you worked with and had meetings with, that you allowed to be in power, suddenly was in power, took over, and now everything's happening? No, you guys, you made this happen. So right there proves what I'm saying, or didn't prove it, but it adds to what I'm saying. They left this. Trump was having talks with the Taliban, the group they used as the justification to invade, 20 years later. And then you leave under Biden, Taliban's still there, and then you blame that for why this is resurging? How do you not see that as a manufactured thing? And it says they've established a base of operations in that country. Its broader movement has also been heavily recruiting since October 7th attacks and the Israeli military operations that followed. Oh, okay, you get it? So they hate the Jewish people. They're going to go after Israel. But they went after Israel's enemies, though. Don't think too hard into it. Just believe ISIS is going to take you out for your freedom, right? That's how lazy this is. Building since October 7th, and why would they go after Iran if you're telling us Iran was part of October 7th? I don't understand why people can't see through this stuff. And it ends saying, Weber noted that a part of the problem is raising awareness surrounding the seriousness of the moment in the common misconception that ISIS was defeated. But he added, branches still remain in Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and elsewhere. Oh, so then literally nothing happened? You fought a war on terror still to this day, and they're everywhere? Yep, because the whole point was they weren't actually doing that, guys. We need to be clear about that. They were using these people. They were growing these people. They were funding these people. If we can't acknowledge that by now, I don't think we're ever going to succeed in anything. My point is, I believe that we are seeing this stuff and people are coming to terms with it. So on that point, I'll play this clip again. And by the way, somebody told me it was from 2015. The point for me on this clip was not necessarily relevant around the date because I was clear that it was old. I think I said 2018 when I framed it. And my point is simply that this is an older opinion of Trump's. And in the next clip over, he talks about taking the guns and due process later. This clip, he talks about shutting down the internet and saying that if you believe in free speech, you're stupid. It's what he says. We got a lot of stupid people. Oh, free speech, he says. You can certainly argue he changed his opinion, but how in the world that would be the case? I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to think what a dramatic change. I hope he did. But my point is, you can clearly see as he's talking about getting rid of people that have views about, Palestinian supporters being framed as anti-Semitic and get rid of them out of the country, or Elon Musk saying we should deport them. You can clearly see that they do still have these opinions. But this overlaps with the very thing we just talked about. In this clip, he's saying that ISIS is recruiting from online. That article had a whole section about people being recruited. And the idea being that we need to shut it down because they're going to recruit and people are going to get radicalized. We're going back to square one. And guess who we asked to help? Who do we reach out to help us shut down the internet?
Because we're losing a lot of people because of the internet. And we have to do something. We have to go see Bill Gates and a lot of different people that really understand what's happening. We have to talk to them, maybe in certain areas, closing that internet up in some way. Somebody will say, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. These are foolish people. We have a lot of foolish people.
Wow.
We have a lot of foolish people. We've got to maybe do something with the internet because they are recruiting by the thousands.
I just don't know how you freedom of speech. Like, you don't diminish that idea. And I mean, look, anything's possible. I just think you need to be real with yourself and acknowledge that that was stated and not brush it off like he's just somehow different today, because the opinions they take today very clearly show you they feel the same way. Just using a different topic. But so it's interesting to see the rise of that, right? So let's get into this point. So this is the article from today, or rather 15th, but talking about the current situation. ISIS-K behind the foiled election day terrorism plot. U.S. officials say. Yeah, well, sure. Good journalism, guys. Anonymous guy in the U.S. government that we're supposed to hold to account says, great journalism. That's everything you see in corporate media today. They don't challenge the media anymore, or the government. But so this goes back to the article, the show we did on March 22nd, 2024. Who is behind the Moscow Crocus City Hall attack? They claim it was ISIS-K. My point going through this really did expand my understanding of specifically what this group is, what they're doing and how they play a role in this manipulation. So that was the first one. And then we followed up on the 23rd. All evidence points to U.S., Israel, Ukraine behind the Crocus City Hall shooting. And does ISIS-K even exist? My point is, I think the evidence shows that they're just a legitimate proxy element today, as all of it is in some way. But my point is, as Saudi Arabia, I think it was Mohammed bin Salman, made a point to say publicly that they basically started these groups, but they've lost control of them. Paraphrasing. Which would make sense in a way, right? Like that they just funded them and dumped money into them and got them to do certain things. And then they just they grew to a point where they had their own power and they just bucked them and went away. I mean, that happens to everyone they work with. I've said over the years, Saddam Hussein was an ally of the United States until suddenly he wasn't. Osama bin Laden was an ally of the United States until suddenly he wasn't. They used him in Afghanistan to fight against the Soviet Union. They made a movie about it, Charlie Wilson's War. The point on top of that, though, the Washington Post called him a warrior of peace until suddenly he wasn't. How do we not put those two things together? Because our media sphere is dishonest. And so my point is that we always can see these elements that we, like with the ISIS point, is that they were being used, and then suddenly maybe they just went on their own way and said, screw you, we don't want to work with you anymore. My point would be, if that was a group that they could take care of, they would. Just like we see in every other example. They suddenly don't like him anymore. That now our puppet president doesn't like what we want to do anymore, replace him. But scream democracy as we do it. That's how they work. So here's some of the quick information. I recommend you watch both those shows because it's very clear to me. Wyatt Reed points this out. For anyone wondering how the U.S. government could be so sure ISIS-K carried out the massacre in Moscow, this should help. And he shows Seth Harp. Incredible. The leader of ISIS-K was a contractor at Bagram Air Force Base, then worked security for drug lord Razdan Dostum, a top CIA proxy. He later worked for Amrullah Saleh, chief of the NDS, literally the CIA's right-hand man in Afghanistan. It's right there on the Wikipedia page, or it used to be until they changed it, which is what's happening constantly today. I mean, I'm not even going to go into it, but somebody made a point about the Twitter archives being removed. I don't know why we think that wasn't. My thought was probably Elon Musk, probably the Twitter itself, probably for obvious reasons. And it was like 2020 to 2024. But overall, it just shows you the kind of scrubbing of the history that, like, it's right out of 1984. There's just, as we go forward, there's so much altered on these platforms that we just don't even know what to believe anymore. But here is the actual page going back. I was able to find it on archive.today or archive.ph. This guy looks like an Oompa Loompa with his hair. It says he worked as a subcontractor of a security company and frequented Bagram Airfield. He was a special guard of then first Vice Presidents Abdul Rashid Dostum, who they mentioned, and Amrullah Saleh, and had a license to transfer weapons since 2017. Now, the base itself, as it says right here, was formerly the largest U.S. military base in Afghanistan. Like, guys, we have to see how obvious this is. The guy's literally working directly through a U.S. base. It's just hard. It's impossible to miss. And on top of that, 2 different CIA proxy elements being overlapped with this one guy. Now, what's hilarious about it is, guess what? That's no longer there today. They have literally removed any mention of that from the Wikipedia page. This is the world we're entering into. This is the 1984 Brave New World technocratic future that we're all warning about, that we're one step at a time, boiling frog, being slowly pipered into by the Elon Musks of the world. Now, back to the point, this is ISIS-K. Or this is what Wyatt Reed was highlighting it as, the elements, the leadership of this overlapping point, because that's who they're talking about with this guy. So here is just a point that I brought up in the last show. Curious, ISIS chooses to attack Russia and not Israel in the current political circumstances. It's a good point, right? If you're all telling us that all these are aimed against Israel, which is what Israel's saying, then why would they go after Russia, who you're claiming is on the other side of this? It just doesn't logically make any sense. But it goes, come to think of it, when did they ever attack Israel? And that's the right question to ask, because it hasn't happened. How do you explain that? I mean, in the context of they're the one they're focusing on. It's all because they hate the Jew. That's what they're putting it. That's what they're currently saying. Now, also, all this was pretty much from the last shows. This person points out that one of the people they caught, this was one of the only pictures we got at the Moscow Crocus Hall attack. As they simply said, doesn't look like ISIS to me. I agree. It looks like a white guy. So you can make up that, but that doesn't mean there couldn't be a white guy in whatever ISIS is, a proxy element of, that's actually the point, but just consider that there's something else afoot here. Oops. Oh, dang it. I hope I didn't lose something. Okay, no, this is just another local article saying Russia thwarted ISIS-K's plot, as they would frame it, to trigger interreligious discord. So it's interesting that this is about creating that sectarian divide. That's part of this bigger dynamic. Here's Jerusalem Post saying Israel treating al-Qaeda fighters wounded in Syria civil war. That's the point we keep highlighting, is that this is how obvious this is. This is Jerusalem Post. And they're literally giving medical treatment to the ISIS and al-Qaeda fighters. Why do you think that is? Here's Avi Yemeni, Mr. Zionist rebelnews.com. He says, while the usual lunatics on Twitter are busy blaming Israel and America for the barbaric attack in Moscow today, ISIS claim responsibility, which I thought was hilarious at the time. I'm like, oh, so you trust ISIS now? Or is it just that you're easily happy to look into it or blindly trust it because that's what you want to be the case? You don't want to blame the obvious culprits. This guy is, the entire platform, I think, has lost a lot of momentum because of how obviously they're shilling for the genocidal Israel right now. But think about how silly it is. Couldn't you, as a supposed journalist, aren't you going to go, well, maybe they just want to take credit because that makes them look like they're stronger? They get, street rep or whatever you want to talk about, street cred. No, because, they claimed it because that works for me. So let's pretend like they're crazy for saying the opposite. So Avi trusts ISIS. Make sure that goes down in history. The point, though, as the RT India pointed out, this whole breakdown is something that ISIS stopped using a long time ago. It says rumors ISIS claim responsibility are unfounded. They widely shared image of the alleges, which Avi took at face value, alleges to be a statement by the group taking responsibility, but the news template that ISIS apparently abandoned many years ago. Now, maybe they picked it back up, but the point is, it seems like what somebody who used ISIS in the past might be an easy route to take. An element that funded and armed and used them might suddenly use the old dynamic they were using before. Certainly possible. Here is a Mint Press News article. Israeli website claims ISIS commander revealed as Mossad agent. It's a very big story. Look at it. This is from Whitney Webb, 2017. And it's an Israeli website. And the information seems pretty damn clear. This was covered pretty broadly. The reality is, guys, this has been exposed by Israeli media many times. They very often, whether Hamas or anything else, very often dress up like their adversaries and carry out terrible attacks. That's called terrorism, by the way. And realistically, funny enough, I accidentally started playing this earlier. That's where it actually comes from.
Certainly the Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 1920s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is in fact an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
That's pretty obvious. Here's a Haaretz article, and it is citing an Iranian official, but the point is that they still covered it. It says Israel's Mossad created ISIS. Now, there's a clip we'll show you in a second, which makes this almost very impossible to miss. The truth, though, is that this is documented. The information is obvious, and it's not just Mossad. It is also the CIA in the United States working in conjunction in this effort. Censored Man shared this, and this is just an old clipping that says, Greater Israel, which we've talked about many times, the 1982 plan for Middle East empire aided by ISIS. Well, the clip you could disregard. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they're not sourced well. But what does it actually stand for? Right? What does ISIS stand for? Maybe you don't know. Oh, this is an old report from corporate media in the United States.
Story about how you tried to find out what they.
Now, by the way, for the clip for the podcast, you can hear it. But he puts this kind of overlay on it. And I think it goes away. But this is a clip from like a what was it again? I forget the name of the show. You'll recognize it. It's like a 60 minutes equivalent kind of thing. It was very mainstream. So this is a very mainstream discussion at a time back then when I guess it wasn't, as aggressively shot down as being anti-Semitic, facts.
Call the Mossad when they deal with public. Find out what they call the Mossad when they deal with public.
So again, sorry, one more time. It says C-SPAN right underneath that. I forget what the show is called, but it's on C-SPAN. Just make that more clear. So I'll let it play out here.
What they call the Mossad when they deal with publicly?
I thought it was a reasonable question, but the trouble is you can't pick up the phone book. There's no Langley in Israel that you can look up, CIA, or in our case, the Mossad. We thought we should ask, what shall we call it in English? You can translate the Hebrew words, as I said, Mossad is institute, but when they write a letter to their friends in the CIA or the British intelligence, what do they call themselves? It took a while. It was a matter of asking the Prime Minister's spokesman. The best you could do, because officially the Mossad is under the Prime Minister's office. And I think he sort of wondered why you want to know and all that, so we explained. And he came up with the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. I mean, if it were to have initials, it would be ISIS. Just simple words like that. Interestingly enough, kind of a British model.
Right. See, at that time, that wasn't some big bombshell. That was just, acronym. That didn't exist the way it does today. Kind of incredible to think about, though, right? It certainly could just be a coincidence. But with all that we know, it's not. Now, let me put it this way. It could just be a coincidence that name is what was used, but the reality that they are involved in its creation is not a falsehood. Just think about how ridiculous that is. Now, here is a Newsweek article. ISIS fighters regret attacking Israel. That's what it says. And have, quote, apologized, according to the former defense minister. I mean, how many things how much can we ignore? So you can clearly show receipts, documentary-wise, of the origin story of creating them, working with them, the kind of incubating period of the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden element, Al-Qaeda, and then from there ISIS, the actions in Iraq and Syria, which sort of drove this into reality, and their funding and arming of it all. Or the idea that you can see that their elements they're pointing to are attacking their adversaries like Iran, or that when they happen to attack them, they say, whoops, we're sorry. And that they have the initials of the secret service of the secret elements of Mossad, or that they've given them medical treatment. I mean, it kind of takes a special kind of ignorance to pretend like that's not the most obvious thing in the world. Antiwar.com, Israeli intel chief, quote, or not quote, but Israeli intel chief. We don't want ISIS defeated in Syria. Now, of course, the argument they're making is that element, sort of like we'd like to see disease proliferate in Gaza, doesn't necessarily mean they made it happen, but it still shows you a morally ambiguous perspective where we're willing to let them suffer for our benefit. Well, we're willing to let a terrorist group hurt people innocent because we don't like Syria for Greater Israel agenda. So it just always shows you what Israel really is. But that also recognizing that they have created this element. Here is the cradle. New batch of ex-ISIS members transferred from Syria to Ukraine. And guess how easy this is to prove? And we've shown you this 100 times. This was on corporate media. Okay, this was being shared. I mean, we've seen this many times. Remember on CNN, they accidentally showed a guy giving the Zig Heil on the middle of the street, and then they blurted out later. Well, this also happened, where they found an ISIS patch on one of the guy's shoulders, and then in the later episodes, they blurted out. Think about taking the conscious choice to hide the fact that people you're blindly supporting are wearing an ISIS patch. Right there. More than one, by the way. See that? Very clear. Here's more of them. Just same one there, but then other elements. And you can find these a lot. I think I've found at least 3 different examples at 3 different times of that happening. Doesn't that mean something? Well, it should, since we just showed you the conversation from the cradle that they're just simply move them over. What does that mean? They're an element. They're a piece on a game board for the people that are using them. Now, again, if you have not seen this, now, even realistically, this is longer than the normal. The link to the main, I think the links are, oh, no, that's right. The links are in each individual link. So if you click each one, the link to the documentary, which is what I recommend you watch, is in there. But if you want to listen to our commentary on top of it, James, Brock, and myself go over each one, part 1, 2, and 3. And we give our, stop every now and again and make comments about certain things. But just watch these documentaries, guys. It will change your entire perspective on how this all started and what's currently happening. And then again, the last point about this, before we bring it into Iran. This just happened. January 5th, 2024. ISIS claims responsibility for deadliest attack in Iran. Right? So ISIS attacks a U.S. and Israel adversary of Russia and then claims responsibility. And Avi goes, yeah, see, they claimed it. We trust what they say, despite the obvious overlaps and inconsistencies. And then, of course, they attack the other adversary. And they also claim it's the same exact thing. This was also the same exact conversation. But let's even say you ignore all the other evidence. The point is what I set up here. How many times exactly do we need to see ISIS, or whatever we know it as, attack the enemies of Israel? And this was, as always, at the peak of hostile rhetoric between Israel and Iran, before we truly understand what we're seeing, that it is them, guys. It's ridiculous and obvious. Now, talking about Iran in particular here, because we've seen this interesting discussion. That's what I titled just the Iran attack part of the title today. Recently, this was yesterday, or at least covered by Jerusalem Post yesterday, Israel will respond to what he claims is an attempted assassination of Netanyahu, which is kind of hilarious to see how much the Trump camp and Netanyahu, they kind of emulate each other. Like, I think they're just picking up a playbook from what's going on for Trump. Like, whatever you think about the earlier discussions, there's been at least 2 of these that I think are ridiculously not what they appear to be. You could possibly talk. I mean, look, I've made the same argument about his ear and how I don't think it's possible that you could have no mark on your ear, but you guys can decide for yourselves what that means. Going forward, even the last one apparently was completely shown to be nothing of what they said it was. Or the one where a guy had a gun in the field somewhere and we just don't even know what happened. And yet that contradicts the first one where I guess they weren't allowed to fire before, but that one they did, it's just so stupid. I think they're just driving this narrative that he's attacked by the deep state and they're trying to kill him everywhere, so we have to save the world. Well, here we are. Now, I would not put it past Iran from trying to do this, especially with what Israel's been doing. But I just want to consider the fact that this is just floated to rationalize what's about to happen. And it says Israel's already poised to retaliate against Iran. And then, of course, now they say, then they tried to kill me, so now it's for sure. That's what I think is happening here. But either way, realistically, they would even have however you want to frame this. Like, I don't like the idea that we can go, that's okay, allowed because they did it first. In fact, I think we shouldn't do that. That makes you as bad as them. But the point would be from the side of the U.S. and Israel is that, well, they just assassinated one of their people. So from the U.S. and Israel perspective, they would have a right to do the same. I don't believe that. Either way, my point is to say why that might, if it is happening, it would make logical sense. But so on that note about them claiming he tried to be assassinated and then the point driving towards a possible another attack on Iran from Israel, unjustifiably, Ken Klippenstein broke this down on the 19th. He says, I've published the leaked U.S. intelligence documents that are detailing Israel's preparations for a strike on Iran. Now, I'm kind of on the fence about this, but he goes, as with J.D. Vance document, once again, the media refuses to publish them. Let's see if this gets me banned again. Now, the whole J.D. Vance thing was interesting because ultimately they tried to make it about doxing, which it was kind of a fine line, but just like with now, in no way was this at the level of the Hunter laptop story. It's interesting how they kind of had their own version of that, where this story was, there was some stuff to be talked about, and they're just kind of, I talked about it recently, and it just gets ignored because that's our guy and you doxed him. It's sad how childish these parties are. It's the same on both sides. And it's just, they see everything in the other and nothing in themselves. And it's sad. But the point here is about the leak alleged of U.S. intelligence documents that they claim they essentially got from spying on Israel, or rather, that's not the claim, but that's what they've seen through the leak. Which his article, which by the way is it's right here. You can watch it. You can check it out there. But in this, he basically goes over the fact that it exposes that the U.S. is spying on Israel. They don't trust them. They're trying to seek out what they're going to do next, and so on. And ultimately, these show a leaked plan that Israel's planning to attack Iran. It's interesting, but it, to me, screams, I guess it's my kind of, jade. It's the way I kind of see, this is what I would expect. Let's put it that way. So that doesn't mean that has to be the case, but that ultimately that Iran, that this was what they would do to drive action, right? Like sort of like leak the idea that they're going to do this to maybe stop them from doing it. Like that'd be one way to look at it. Like the U.S. start trying to recognize how much they're failing in this agenda to try to stop the belligerent Israel that they can't control from doing what they don't want it to do, if that's the case. Because I do believe that they don't want this to happen with Iran because they're going to lose. I think that's the fundamental truth here. I think that I think even Israel knows that, and they're trying to drive in some kind of end time prophecy. So it's interesting to see. So consider that it could be something that's not there, or you could even argue that it's Israel floating this in order to sort of drive that action. It's hard to see. But here's what the Washington Post covered. Oh, actually, no, I that's right. I wasn't going to go through it really, but it just says U.S. investigates intelligence leak about Israel's plans for attacking Iran. 2 highly classified reports about Israel's preparations for striking Iran were posted online by a pro-Iran site. Now, that seems to be challenged now by the actual facts. So that is one of the reasons why I get the sense this was something that was, honestly, in most cases, when there's a leaked thing that sort of aids in some way their agenda, my skepticism here immediately stand up. It's okay, well, that probably was dumped in the story by them to drive a certain feeling and create the air the way they want it to seem. So the pro-Iran site is what gave that. It makes me think that, because it turns out that this doesn't seem to be the actual case. So they slanted it on that to make it seem like Iran is the hacker, right? So read into it for yourself, but here's what's interesting. Drop Site News says a set of classified U.S. intelligence, which Ken Klippenstein shared on the 19th, so just to give him credit for that, purported to show information about Israel's plans to strike Iran that have been confirmed as authentic by CNN, which frankly is nothing to me, but they're claiming it's real. Drop Site News has also been reviewing these documents since they were posted, and in their opinion, ultimately the different hallmarks seem to suggest that it is real. The nature of the motivations of the leak are yet unknown, while the U.S. government claims to be conducting an investigation. Yeah, whatever. The documents, which make reference to Israel's unacknowledged nuclear program, can see below. So that is an interesting anomaly there, but I don't think Israel cares. I think Israel wants us to know they're there, but doesn't want to be seen as admitting it publicly. But we all know. It's a big open joke. He's actually been caught stupidly saying something in that direction on like a live video before, and they like a dumb smile and moved on. It's many times. So just because they acknowledge that does not mean that was, not within their knowledge. I actually think that almost leans more to the idea that Israel wanted this to be put out. But it goes, the administrators of the Telegram channel, where the classified documents were first posted, updated with this information, simply saying it came from the Middle East Spectator, a different news aggregator that put this out. And then it says, another statement by the Telegram channel rejects claims made by Axios and Jerusalem Post, which I think that's why that got planted in the story, that it was Iran affiliated, and more info on how the leak originated. So the group that actually leaked it is claiming it wasn't Iran affiliated. Now, of course, they could be lying, but I don't see the interest in hiding that. It almost would be something you'd want to praise if they were on the other side of it. Anyway, that's where this is at right now. And so the point is, where all they're really doing is floating the idea that they're about to attack Iran. So just like the other way around, maybe that's a calculated move. Maybe they want Iran to be able to defend it so they don't feel like they have to respond. That's a very common thing in all this, but that's not what I would expect from Israel. Not right now. Now, Mensch Osint, or however you say that, the account says, my 2 cents on the U.S. leaked documents about Israeli preparations attack on Iran. He says that he believes they're legit. They mentioned an Israeli covert UAV flight activity at Ramon Airfield between October 15th and 16th. And coincidentally, on October 17th at 1 a.m, a drone alert that triggered around Ramon Air Base. He says that was the only time ever a drone intrusion alert sounded in a remote area. This on October 24th, when alerts sounded everywhere. And he goes, well, the bottom line is that he ultimately thinks the documents, based on what they were saying about that, is one of the reasons that it suggests that it's real. And then, of course, I just find this interesting. So the U.S. Civil Defense News, which, you should be skeptical about, or really, question everything all the time. It says, U.S. troops and American air defenses are now fully deployed in Israel, ready for the coming war with Iran. Except it's not. That's a video from 2019, and they're lying to you. These people are everywhere. Now, they either are not doing their due diligence, or they're trying to make you think that we're building towards a war with Iran. I frankly think it's more the latter. I think there's an agenda here. But you can decide for yourself whether this platform didn't do its due diligence or it's lying to you. It's up to you. But I think that's important. Why is that happening? Now, Jimmy just shares this kind of saying, making a joke about Team America World Police, calling us out for invading, putting troops in another country. You remember that movie, basically? He's like, I don't want to say the cuss word, but, the point is that people are trying to make us think this is happening. Now, this is interesting. To me, to give you my thoughts first on this, this is posted on August 8th, so it's not new, from CBS News. It's an audio recording of Donald Trump discussing highly classified or confidential secret documents. There's 2 things I'll talk about this. One, I just have to point out how, we're being run by a bunch of children. A bunch of high school gossiping children. You listen to it. You should be embarrassed that these people are somehow seen as leading this country. But the point for me is I get the sense that this is about seeding the idea that Donald Trump doesn't want the war that will happen. That's what I think. That he wanted to stop it, but he couldn't stop it before they let it happen, kind of a thing. Even if it begins while he's in president, which is what I think is happening next. But you can decide for yourself, as always. But it's blaming it on Milley for the most part, and then the way they kind of yuck it up about the whole thing, I'll point out next. But here's what it says. Oh, wait. Okay, I mixed them up. Sorry, just making sure I didn't have these out of order.
Bad, sick people.
That was your coup, against you.
I mean, is that Marjorie Taylor Greene? I think so. I don't think they're friends at this point anymore. That was 2021. But let me know what you think the voice is.
Well, it started right at the
beginning. When Milley's talking about, you were going to try to do a coup. No, they were trying to do that before you even were sworn in. That's right. Trying to overthrow your election.
Well, with Milley, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look. This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Defense Department and him.
He's talking about going after Iran, which, by the way, right now, and even then, Donald Trump was very clearly making a case for. Openly, constantly. And because Israel wanted that. And so doesn't this kind of doesn't make sense, does it? Like maybe he did that and behind the scenes. He's saying, no, that's certainly possible. To me, this feels like a deliberate leaked concept to make it seem like you weren't the one when you were just doing what you were told by the funding that was coming your way from Israel and Zionism. But I just find it interesting the way it's being framed. Now, on top of that, it's the way that they talk about this. Like, it embarrasses me as an American.
We looked at some. This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him.
Oh, and these are classified documents that he's not supposed to be kind of cavalier way, just handing around the room.
All sorts of stuff. It's pages long. Look. Wait a minute. Let's see here.
Well, I guess my point is, if this was leaked out, it's almost more embarrassing that they think this. And it feels staged to me. The way they're talking, the way that they're making these points, like as if they know you can't see them, it feels staged. And I could be wrong, but either way, if it was, that's even more embarrassing because this is what they think you should be listening to, and this seems embarrassing.
Yeah. I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know. Mm-hmm. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. There's a secret information. Look at
Secret. We're not supposed to be showing you.
this. You attack, and
Hillary would print that out all the time, you know.
she'd send it to Anthony Weiner, the pervert.
Think about these are lowbrow, lowest common denominator people. It makes me sad.
By the way, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
I was just saying, because we were talking about it, and he said he wanted to attack Iran and what? These are the papers.
He said, "You did it. You did it, Trump." I just, it's these people are juvenile. It kills me. Now, am I wrong though? Doesn't it feel like this is like blunt? Like they're like they did. The way they're talking, it doesn't seem like it to me. It seems like they're standing around a recorder and they're all making this. That's what it sounds like to me. You guys can decide for yourself.
This was done by the military, given to me. I think we can probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
figure out See, as president, I could have declassified it. No, I can't, but this is classified.
Now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
Now we have a problem. I mean, technically, that's a crime. But who cares, though? Because it's Trump, so we shouldn't care, right?
It's so cool. I mean, it's so, here I have, and you probably almost didn't believe me, but now you believe me.
No, I believe
It's incredible, right?
No,
hey, bring some Cokes in, please.
Yeah, bring in some more Coca-Cola. Make America healthy again. Woohoo! All right, so I already made my points on that. To me, that sounds very clumsy, and I think that it was about creating a narrative. You can decide for yourself. Now, here's more today. This is October 17th, posted by Jack Posobiec. And he goes, Trump comes out against the regime change in Iran. No, he doesn't at all, actually. But that's what Jack wants you to think, because that's how that's his role in all this. He comes out against regime change. No, he didn't even answer the question, as usual. And in fact, I think it's obviously the opposite, like he tried to do twice during his administration. But let's listen to Jack Poso, because he knows what's going on. Here's what he said on the Patrick Bet-David show.
What's going to happen to Iran with you by the end of your administration? I'm not asking.
I would like to see Iran be very successful. The only thing is they can't have a nuclear weapon.
Are you okay with the same administration?
Okay, so right out of that, right there, alone. Now they clearly said that they will never and they won't want. Even the State Department and the International Atomic Energy Agency, as of this year, have confirmed that they are not doing that. I showed you this in a recent show. The narrative and the people in the parties don't care. They'll always pretend like that's not the case because Israel says it's not the case. They've been saying that for 40 years. They're lying to you. My point is that he said that because that's where that's coming from. There is nothing other than that, other than they're removing themselves under Trump's administration from the JCPOA, which gave them the legal right, I think it was Article 36, to increase their enrichment. That's where we still are. And they're not even at the point of what they need, 90%. They're a ways away from reaching the percentage needed to make the material needed to make a bomb. It's funny how they never want to frame it like that for you, right? The facts. So here he goes in and says, they can't have that though, which why though? Every other country in the world, including Israel, clearly is allowed to. Why are they different? Because this is something Israel's saying. That's why. So right out of the gate, he does not say no regime change. He makes a clear case for why that might be the case. And it gets worse.
Very successful. The only thing is they can't.
So he says, I want them to be very successful. That's what they love to lean into. That's my point about how Trump plays it both ways. So they'll ignore the rest of it and be like, but he said successful. He can't have regime change. He said, well, maybe in his mind, he wants the Shah back in place. And that's probably what Jack wants too. The point is that's regime change. And just because you make a statement that we wanted to be successful, you can read into it all you want. My point is he didn't answer it because I could just as easily read into the nuclear comment, which would mean he wants them to be regime change, so they can't have it. But my point is you don't know. I think all I'm basing on is his past actions, which clearly show that, yes, he does.
Have a nuclear weapon.
Are you okay with the same administration and way of governing states? Or would you like to see it go back to the 70s when Shah was running it and Iran was...
When Shah was running it. The point is that Shah was a dictator and it was a terrible situation for most Iranians. Yeah, the Israeli, U.S., and Iranian elitists that lived in this nice little bubble, which is what they only showed you, yeah, they had a great time. Had everything they needed. Everybody else was struggling. And then when 1979 revolution took place, the Operation Ajax was the regime change, they revolted and took back their country. And yes, have plenty of problems. I mean, if you think right now if you look at half this country hates our government, think about the context of how that gets framed from the U.S. perspective in any other country. It's just so bad how we can't apply that logic into partisanship anyway. The point is that this is not what anybody should be calling for, or why we think we should be discussing what we want for Iran. Why is it our discussion to be having? It's not.
Was one of the top 3 countries in tourism.
So I should have let you hear. So yeah, top 3 countries when you overthrew the government because you allowed people who the idea was the Iranian people suffered. It doesn't matter what other metric you throw out there. The vast majority of Iranians, and Robert's talked about this extensively, were suffering because it was a despotic country for people. This was an overthrown country. It's the same thing that's happening to the Iraqi people, to the Syrian people, to the Lebanese people. Look around. Oh no, excuse me. Well, that too. Libyan people, excuse me. So we can ignore all that? Every one of these supposed liberations, the people of the country suffer incredibly. But they don't care about that. And this guy, he's Iranian, isn't he?
Can't get totally involved in all. We're supposed
in tourism.
We can't get totally involved in all. We're supposed. We can't run ourselves. Let's face it.
Okay, so he just skipped right past it. He didn't say no. He said we can't get involved with that. But you are though. Too late. You got involved 15 times during your administration. Israel's driving that aggressively. They're about to attack, and whether you or Biden are there, you're going to support it. So he didn't even answer the question. And this is my point. So Jack, see, he said no to regime change. No, he did not. Jack is a liar.
Sure.
Patrick, we can't run ourselves.
You put sanctions, the people are going to turn and flip on them. It's not going to be a...
God, I really don't like this. I got to be honest. That's just terrible. He doesn't know what he's talking about all the time. The point is, put sanctions, it's going to hurt people. I mean, this is where you're from. I don't know if that's exactly the case, but I think he's Ryan. The point is, guys, this is what they're trying to do. I've shown you this many times. Oh, wait, that's not it. There it is. This is during Trump's administration. This is Rudy Giuliani talking about the sanctions they had on their government of Iran, and that starving people to selling their organs for food was how you have a successful regime change. So what he's calling for is that, more sanctions. And guess what? His narrative that giving them sanctions will make them flip right away. No, it won't. It hasn't, not once. They've been doing this for decades, and it hasn't. They're fighting back because they care more about their independence than they do about just about anything else, because they've had to fight for it from these governments, while those governments claim to be fighting for the very same thing.
So now tell me that you're not a serious threat. If the regime we're trying to overthrow sees us as a threat, you are a threat. It is a reality. The protests are getting worse. I don't know when we're going to overthrow them. It could be in a few days.
And he's talking to the MEK, which is the group the U.S. government and Israel have been wanting in charge for a long time. Now, I'm willing to bet you anything, even if they go with the Shah's relative, which is what they're pushing now. The MEK has a structure in there because they've been stoking them this entire time. That's who he's being paid to speak to right now. They are a terrorist organization, even according to the U.S. government.
Months, a couple of years are getting worse. I don't know when we're going to overthrow them. It could be in a few days, months, a couple of years, but it's going to happen. They are going to be overthrown. The people of Iran obviously have now had enough. The sanctions are working. The currency is going to nothing.
And of course, they blame that on Iran. How many times have you heard them say that? They can't even manage their country. Their economy is terrible. Well, he literally just told you why. Because they're destroying their currency with their sanctions. Same thing they do in Venezuela, same thing they do everywhere, and then blame them for it. And the mindless followers, like the Jacks of the world, are going along with it because they have an agenda. They don't care about the truth.
They're where Russia was. They're where Poland was. We see signs of young men and women saying, give me some food. We saw a sign of a man trying to sell his internal organs for $500 American, probably a fortune in Iran today. This is truly pitiful. These are the kinds of conditions that lead to successful revolution.
My God. So the idea is that you can't, there's no misspeaking here. The English language is clear. The words have meaning. He goes from, our sanctions have destroyed their currency. They don't have any money. And because they don't have any money, they're now selling their organs for food. That's what makes a good revolution. That's what he just said. Nowhere in there can you go, because Iran, bad guy. Now, even if you think that, even if that's the truth, it is still their fault. They're still willing to starve people to death in order to get what they want, even if what they want benefits the people. Which it doesn't, by the way. And we've seen that repeatedly. These are monsters, guys. These are the terrorists of the world. Even if you want to pretend everything that they claim, the terrorists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are just as bad as they say they're, what they are, but they're also being funded by them. The point is that what they're doing from an institutional level at the top of the whole pyramid, they are the worst of the worst. You have to understand how much the influence and funding and directional action, this is causing what we're dealing with today.
What's going to happen to Iran? Turn and flip on them. It's not going to be a...
So as I said, I'm shocked to find out Jack is misrepresenting the clip. Shocked, I say. As usual, he gives a non-answer, Trump, and his mouthpieces make it into whatever is most advantageous at the moment. Anyone who thinks Trump will do anything but exactly what Israel wants with Iran is a child. I hope I'm wrong. Now, so some points, actually, I think right now what I'm going to plan on doing is I'm going to cover the parts in the title, but I'm going to push some of the more of the larger Israel coverage off because I have to get going here pretty soon. But I'm just going to quickly show the Lebanon parts, and then go into Iran, and then show you the Oxfam part to finish. The rest of it was really some important stuff that I did want to show you about Sinwar and more about the food aid, just in general. But I don't think I've got much time left. But so this is a clip I want to show you about Lebanon, because the overlap, I mean, the bigger point is that clearly they really want you to think that Iran is some kind of mastermind linchpin of all this. It's just not the case. Obviously, they're aligned. They're allies. And especially more today, seeing as how they're being driven, it's completely in their interest right now to align, even if they weren't before. But they were. They're recognizing that they have a stance against the oppression that they're fighting. Simple. But to claim that they're somehow driving all this stuff and then claim that's terrorism while you're literally watching I think most people in the world have never seen a more vivid, provable example of terrorism in their lives. You may not be identifying it as that, but you're watching this and going, God, how is this possible? I mean, most people are clearly going, yeah, Israel's doing some terrible stuff. That's what terrorism looks like, guys. The narrative doesn't even matter in this context. They're literally broad stroke murdering anybody in front of them. It's terrorism. Again, the reality of definition there is that they're using military force to achieve a political end. That's the actual definition of terrorism. Now, Leila Molan Allen points this out. An entire family of 20, and my point in general is that this is also happening in Lebanon, to go back to what I'm talking about here. And that they want to claim it's all about Iran, which connects to what we were just saying, but that they're bombing indiscriminately in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria. It's in Yemen. All those are happening. An entire family of 23 people was wiped out by an Israeli airstrike on the northern Lebanon Christian village of Aito on the 14th. So all those Republicans out there proclaiming you're fighting against Israel just murdered an entire Christian village in Lebanon. They had fled the bombing in the south to take refuge there. 2 of them were babies. Only pieces of them were left. That's your legacy. Hold on. How did I miss that? Oh, here it is.
I'm at the site of an Israeli airstrike yesterday on the village of Aito. That's in Zgharta, a very Christian area in the north of Lebanon.
And this is PBS, by the way.
This is a small mountain village, and this house was hit. It was sheltering about 29 displaced people who'd fled from the south and the suburbs of Beirut. The house has been completely flattened. In the trees behind, you can see there are still clothes that have been flung around. Civil defense volunteers are behind me, still sorting through the rubble. They've now removed all the bodies. 23 people were killed in this strike.
I mean, think about how crazy it is that this can be on corporate news now. I mean, pretty consistently for at least half a year, like really consistently. Now, definitely still holding back on important stuff, definitely still slanting coverage, but covering it. Straight up murder. There's no way you pretend this is not exactly what it looks like. The evidence is there. Again, it's not Gaza. There's people there filming. There's people that have access. You're going to see the dead bodies. You're going to be able to prove that they were not terrorists. You're going to be able to show this more definitively than anything we've seen in Gaza, even though that was pretty definitive. And yet still, it continues. This is the hardest part for people to grapple with. It should be. There's no way that the only thing, well, the most important thing that needs to show you is that they are exactly, really, the worst example of what we thought they might be. That's almost been hard for me to come to terms with, as much as I see them. To think it really is that, oh, how else do you read this? Where is everybody? How is it possible to pretend that any of them are good if we're literally allowing this to continue? If I were in Congress, I would not stop screaming about this for 24/7. It's not because that's the only issue I care about. It would be because we are funding a genocide. You will go down in history. Look, go back in these genocides in the past, I guess, other than Israel, which is the interesting common thread. The point is that people are remembered for these things forever. And I just think it's incredible that there's not people I mean, there's plenty, I think, being done good right now by Thomas Massey and people like that. But where wouldn't they be? Why aren't they screaming about this? Why aren't they standing up and constantly making a statement? I'd be on TV every night. I'd be making posts all over. We can't allow, if you get enough momentum coming from that mainstream level, we can actually change this. There's definitely legal avenues to take to stop them from funding them. They're already flirting with that idea because we're forcing that, even though they're going to continue funding them. The whole aid dynamic, they're going, if you don't give them more aid while we pretend you're not stopping aid, then we'll stop weapons in 30 days. That's what they just said. 30 days. We'll give you 30 more days of genocide and you'll forget about it by then and we'll move on anyway. That's what's going to happen. I just don't understand it, guys. I don't. I refuse to believe that every single person in every single position is completely gone. I think it's a large portion. But I guess I could be wrong.
Give them children. You can still smell the burning on the air, and in the background there are Israeli jets flying overhead. This really is a complete site of destruction here. All the cars here are on fire as well. And it seems that nobody would have been able to get out of the strike without severe injury.
Here is a antiwar.com. Civilians reported killed as Israeli strikes multiple buildings in Beirut suburb. 19th. Now, these aren't like one-off stories. This is every day. And it's happening in Lebanon. It's happening in Gaza. They're just straight up mass murdering people at such a high level that it's becoming impossible to even cover it all. Sarah, in one image, really does break this down for you. And this is another Christian village, by the way. And I don't know how many times I made this point over the years, whether it's Syria, everywhere you look, it seems as if Israel, no, let me put it the right way. It is happening that Israel is targeting the Christian locations almost predominantly. In Syria, the Christian populations were almost predominantly targeted until they were removed. Same thing with Gaza, where they ultimately forced these elements out. Other than the ones that were still there. This was a pressure out, or the idea that they removed, that's a different point, but the Jewish population from Gaza was forced out by Israel, and they used it to blame it on the Gaza location. The point is that they've seen this in Syria. Syria had the third largest population of Christians in the Middle East, and it's still large, and now they've been targeted by Israel's bombing in Syria, and we don't talk about that. And we act like they're the greatest ally of Christianity, or people do. Here's another example. My point is that I believe this is not by accident. This is the village of Rameh in southern Lebanon. Israel's deliberately obliterating entire villages and towns in Lebanon, erasing centuries of history and culture. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I take it back. I thought this was the Christian one as well. I just showed you the one, by the way, 30 seconds ago that was a Christian location. In any case, this is just a village, which really, it's human life, and it all should matter just as much. Village up top. Entirely bombed at once. Just absorb that. Talk about precision, right? We're pinpoint targeting Hamas, Hezbollah. What are we talking about? Tunnels, human shields? No, we'll just 2,000-pound bombs, just annihilate the entire village. And now here's how it looks. Completely bombed out. The entire hillside village. You'd think you might, briefly see a conversation about that on corporate media. No. Doesn't even matter. Imagine having an entire city bombed to nothing and not even having it mentioned on the news. That's where we are. Now, Israeli airstrikes, as of today, are beginning to bomb right next to the Beirut airport. Here we go again, ladies and gentlemen. And guess what? I just told you about this. They weren't letting them fly out. And then the U.S. government wasn't allowing its own people to leave and was saying, yeah, you could pay for it, though. And then Israel wasn't letting them. And then Americans were being killed, which is happening in all these locations, and nobody seems to care. Where are all the America First out there that aren't caring about Americans being killed by Israel? Tom Cotton, I have it somewhere in here, made this point about how dare you not call out the hostages? And I'm okay, well, how dare you not call out Israel murdering Americans in Lebanon and Gaza? What about that? Oh, nobody comments. How funny. Well, here's a video of them bombing from today. Here's one of the things they used for the image today. Robert Inlakesh shared this today. Western governments condemned Hezbollah killing 4 Israeli soldiers in drone strikes on a military base. So a military strike that's legally protected from every dynamic at this point, they make it out to be terrorism. Complete silence on the current terror bombing of Beirut and cities throughout Lebanon. We just showed you the one of the Beirut suburbs. Here is the airport. I mean, this is a civilian location. In every possible way, this is protected. They're not even making an argument about why they're doing this. They just do it. Complete silence. What will Sky News read out the names of the Lebanese victims? Of course not. It's crazy. This is in real time, guys. They're as we speak. Here's the National. Beirut airport perseveres, amid Israeli bombs and GPS jamming. Think about how crazy that is. They are literally bombing and jamming the GPS of planes that are trying to fly. These are civilian airliners. Can you imagine if that was Iran, if that was Syria, if that was Russia, or even the allegation was floated by Israel? Oh my God, we talked about it for a week. Now they're jamming GPS of flights full of civilians that might crash and kill them all, but we won't even mention that. You all know exactly what's going on. Now, I'm going to talk about this in a future one. This is just simply about the current presence, which we already know. The U.S. has presence in Israel, and this admits they've been there from the beginning, from October 7th anyway. Fusion cells, they're already there. They've been there the whole time. They're admitting they were part of sussing out Hamas. And so we were lied to. Yeah, big surprise. They were on the ground, boots on the ground from the very beginning, just like we told you. Surprise, surprise. This one I'll show you on the way out, which I'll reference again just because it is so mind-blowingly crazy. The New Yorker. This is the title of the New Yorker. This is on shelves in the supermarket. Rationalizing the horrors of Israel's war on Gaza. Why would that even be something you would say? Why would you rationalize the horrors of, well, because you want to obfuscate, gaslight. But this is the worst part. The novelist Howard Jacobson has argued that too much press coverage of dead Palestinian children is a new form of blood libel against Jews. I mean, it just speaks for itself. I mean, I could go off on this for the next I could talk about this for an hour. There's so many different things you could talk about. It's the idea, whether it's aimed at Jews versus the political actions of a government, or the simple idea that even if you are over-covering the murder of children, that somehow that could be flipped into attacking the person murdering the child. I mean, guys, this is a case study right here of everything wrong with the Zionist perspective. It blows my mind that there are people, and I do think this exists, that actually don't see why that's a problem. I'm convinced that's a small minority of the conversation. I think we're dealing with a bunch of very deranged people, and then some that are falling for this mindset or blinding themselves to it, and then everybody else sees what's going on. It's really not my opinion. It's pretty easy to see right now. But my God, this is who we're dealing with. And as Sal the Agris points out, Israel kills 3 school buses of kids daily. That's not a joke. It's crazy to see how many we can see on average being killed. And here, they're telling you too much coverage of that is an attack on Jewish people. Who's even talking about Jewish people? We're talking about the Israeli government. But because you conflate the two, wouldn't that be by your argument the right case? No, you're racist. Yeah, okay. Doesn't make sense. Well, the reality is that this is going way back before October 7th, as Glenn points out. May 9th, 2023, Israeli strikes on Gaza killed top militants and 10 civilians. Oops. What was that about the ceasefire they broke on October 7th? Oh, that's right. It didn't exist and you were bombing it the whole time. Or the idea that, as this is it's just actually coming from UNICEF that made this point, on October 6th, 2023, the deadliest year for Palestinian children, says UNICEF. But that's October 6th, Ryan. This makes sense. Yeah, you all know it does. UN leaders or rather German leaders making statements that killing civilians is okay because narrative. And then a actual morally sound person speaks up and says you're a lunatic and that's not the law. And this all come into this point in the next show, I think. Now, what we're dealing with in northern Gaza, which we already know, is heartbreaking. I mean, it really is. Like, if from the podcast, you got to just see this video. This stretching, sprawling view of the down the middle of a massive area that used to be beautiful. It is now gone. Decrepit tents in the middle of the street, old broken buildings. I mean, this is like multiple city blocks. Again, it's the whole area, really. But it's just is that pinpoint targeting, or is that it's just demolishing everything? You don't need to answer that. It's obvious. It's self-evident. It's a what's that again? Blank on that term all of a sudden. Something question. It's funny how things just jump out of your mind. The bottom line is that it's obvious what you're looking at. That is destruction. That is not about trying to stop bad guys. That's about destroying human life. Rhetorical question. There it is. So, same point here. I'm just gonna randomly quickly go through, but this is video being put out of them combating terrorism. These are civilians we're talking about, guys. They're not even trying to pretend these are all Hamas. They're just rounding up civilians and treating them like prisoners. Look at and torturing, raping, killing. That's not hypothetical, guys. Journalists on the ground covering what's going on. We'll go over this. This is one of the worst things. A child gets attacked, shot by a sniper, and they wait until all the other children run up to help him, and they bomb it again. I just don't know how much we need to see. You know, the idea that these are all children, guys. It's gone. Look at that. Dead bodies everywhere. You want to tell me that that's somehow about fighting bad guys, right? You snipe a child and blow up everybody trying to help them. Every day, guys. Every day. This is what's going on. Israeli strike on Gaza kills 28, including 5 in a school. 5 children. October 17th. Every day. Mariam Barghouti, North Gaza is facing the harshest conditions since the start of the genocidal campaign. Oh, at least 450 killed in the last 2 weeks in northern Gaza alone. And that's as far as she knows. Where Palestinians are intentionally starved, especially in the last weeks where no aid is allowed. No aid at all. Breastfeeding mothers, wounded people, starving children are being bombed and riddled with bullets while enduring Israeli savagery with no shelters, no hospitals, no water, barely a glimpse of electricity. And this has been a year plus. Rami Abdul says Oxfam has confirmed that 4 of its water engineers were killed in an Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis. The engineers were working to provide essential water services to Gaza. Well, it's obvious why they killed them. They can't let them have water because then they could survive. That's not facetious. That's the reality. That's what's happening. They just murdered representatives of Oxfam, an international organization that's not Hamas, that nobody's going to cry foul about. Well, the UN maybe, and some elements of it. Not the U.S. government, not the rules-based order. Don't expect that because they don't care. Here's Oxfam International. Oxfam condemns the killing of water engineers in Gaza from the 19th. Don't be surprised if you hear nothing about this, or if Matt Miller says he'll refer to Israel and will raise the issue and never brings it up again. Arnaud Bertrand highlights, last month at the UN, Netanyahu said, we're not going to settle Gaza. In July, in Congress, Netanyahu said Israel doesn't seek to resettle Gaza. Yet his own party now calls for preparing to settle Gaza, which, by the way, you know, because it's obvious, because you've seen it the entire time, because they've been saying it out loud the entire time. My point is that they lie publicly and then do something else. But you should know this by now. Here's Haaretz. Netanyahu's Likud party issues an invitation to an event titled Preparing to Settle Gaza. They're laughing at you. The ridiculous morons like Brian Mast that believe that they're either being lied to and think they know, or they're lying to you, America, because they're working for somebody else. There's only two things happening here, because they're pretending this is blood libel. How dare you accuse us of doing what we're openly doing and praising and celebrating and having conferences for? Crazy. Israel's strike on northern Gaza kills at least 87. That's today. One after another. Now we're going to go over this doctor part in a coming up show, but I do want to show you, I added a bunch more. So here's the thread, by the way. I added, I think, 16 more videos, or more than that. No, maybe 12. But I'm more doctors every day, adding to this list of people. Oh, and that was the other point too, just to show you quickly that this warning being put on there, that's what I was showing you earlier. That's suppressing the reach, and it's all because of this video, because the video is powerful. And I'll show you right here. Here's somebody else sharing it, which I'm glad to see. Johnny UTD, whoever that is. Looks like I'm following him. I don't remember. Point. There's no warning. Okay. Watch, you probably get it now since I shared it. Here's my share. Different one, different post. Also got the warning, which you guys see, it's every single time I share it. I think it's because of the obvious that it's a powerful video that is getting reach, and they don't want that. Here's like the warning I get. We put the warning on the message. Well, it doesn't violate any of your rules of engagement at all. But what does is, going kill all the children, like that guy speaking, but you don't care about that, right? Obviously, this is about, like I said, suppressing the tweet that shows you what they're doing, not the actual tweet of them doing it. No, that's okay. But you compiling enough to show you how bad they are, that's got to be limited. Same point for mine. That's what's happening. And Cam Higby says, the world owes Netanyahu a thank you. People are ridiculous. After everything I just showed you, that's what he's saying. Now I'm going to come back to all this. We'll wrap here. Yeah. Ultimately, the point is they're still starving. Israel has barred 6 international medical charities from even entering Gaza, according to WHO. The sad reality, guys, is they are going to continue to push this unless we do something about it. There's nothing else. There's no other way to frame this. We need to stand up and do something, or this will continue. Now, I'm never calling for violence. I just simply do not think that's going to be an answer to this problem. I think violence begets violence. But for example, if everybody in this country simply stopped, which again, like literally impossible, I would argue, or not literally, but wildly unlikely. If we just all said, we're not going to move, we're not going to go to work, we're not going to do anything until you stop funding Israel, well, guess what? They would stop. There's just no way they could even function without the worker bees. But that's not going to happen. I hope it does. My point is that we could do something. But the problem is always is these partisan screamers that don't care about any of this. They don't care about you. They care about using you to benefit, just like the politicians. But we don't see that because we align with our party lines and we think that we're on the same teams. The sad reality is that a lot of you care about what's going on in Israel, but they don't. If you do something. Push them. But of course, you're going to get pushed back. You're going to get pushed out like we saw with Kyle Rittenhouse the moment he barely said the wrong thing. That's how this works. But maybe then you should recognize that you don't want to be part of that anymore, that they're not honest. They're not engaged with the truth. They're doing it for their own purposes. Do something. If you're a moral person, if you have compassion, if you have empathy, I don't know how you're not. I can't live with, I'm doing this because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to do everything that I could to stop what's going on with your tax dollars, our tax dollars, in our name. Every single person being murdered over there is being murdered with a bomb that says this is from the United States. And some of them would perceive it as such. And it's kind of hard not to at this point, but hopefully they're listening to what we're saying and recognize that it's just like we would recognize the same in foreign countries. It's not the people's, it's the government. And that's the point about Vanessa Beeley recognizing that we are a global resistance at this point. We are fighting against something much larger than Israel, the United States. We're fighting against this growing, budding, technocratic power structure that is literally using this to grow and train what it's going to be using on everybody else. And I think it all starts right here. And if we don't help this succeed, and I don't mean like winning or losing, but stopping this agenda from happening. And I do think that begins, from my perspective, with stopping the Palestinian plight from being, or rather the Palestinian existence from being rubbed out. that if we can't stop that, we will all lose. That's what I believe. I believe it's obvious. I see this all building. And if we, like, I mean, whether it's about the Palestinian plight or not, if we allow Israel and the United States to win whatever that looks like after doing what just happened, and that we just move forward, not only will the genocide be normalized, or the idea that this is how you respond to your enemies killing civilian population until they give up, like, this will be the new world that we live in. I don't think anybody's okay with that. If you agree with that, if you feel the same thing, then do something about it. I just know that this is the time. Right now, moment by moment, we're losing one more life, one more opportunity. Find the courage to do something. I love you all. Thank you for being here today. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.